Section 1. The mystery of Stewie Griffin's voice, who can actually hear him. There is a 1-year-old baby sitting in a high chair at a kitchen table in a fictional Rhode Island town. He is eating strained peas. He is wearing a little yellow shirt and a pair of red overalls. His head is shaped like a football, and he is calmly, matter-of-factly, explaining to a Labrador retriever his detailed plan to reverse engineer a proton accelerator using materials he has ordered off the internet under a false identity. And nobody in the room is reacting. Not his mother, who is right there at the kitchen counter. Not his father, who just walked in through the back door. Not his sister, who is trying to talk to Lois about something that happened at school. Just the dog, who responds with a dry remark about how the plan seems overcomplicated. Just Brian, who nods slowly, pours himself a martini, and tells Stewie that maybe, just maybe, building a proton accelerator in a suburban kitchen is not the most sensible idea on a Tuesday afternoon. This is the single most frequently asked question in all of Family Guy fandom. Not who Peter Griffin's real father is. Not why Ernie the giant chicken gives Peter such a hard time. Not how Stewie built a time machine before he could reliably use a toilet. The most frequently asked question, confirmed by Seth MacFarlane himself in an interview with TV Shows on DVD, is this one. Can the other characters actually hear and understand Stewie Griffin? And the answer, like almost everything about this show, is deeply, almost beautifully, inconsistent. Let's start with what MacFarlane has actually said on the record, because he has given more than one answer to this question over the years, and those answers are not exactly the same. In his earliest and most widely quoted response, MacFarlane told the interviewer that everybody on the show can hear and understand Stewie perfectly. The reason nobody takes him seriously is simply because he is a baby. Parents, in real life and in fiction alike, have a tendency to dismiss the things their very young children say, even when those things are coherent. Stewie could be outlining a plan to overthrow a small sovereign nation, and Lois would nod absently and tell him, "Yes, that sounds lovely, sweetie. Now eat your carrots." The joke by that reading is not that nobody can hear Stewie. The joke is that they can hear him just fine and still don't care. But then there is the answer MacFarlane gave at San Diego Comic-Con in 2011, which is more specific and more complicated. At that panel, he broke it down by character. Brian always understands Stewie, completely, every time. Chris understands him sometimes. Peter and Lois and Meg generally don't understand what he is saying, or at minimum don't register it as something they need to respond to. And then there is the show itself, which over more than 20 seasons has contradicted both of those answers repeatedly, cheerfully, and with absolutely zero concern for internal consistency. Take Peter Griffin, for example. In the episode called Inside Family Guy, Peter responds directly to something Stewie says with the line, "Thank you, Stewie, who I can understand." Which is a funny meta-joke, but also a moment where the show is openly telling the audience that yes, Peter hears Stewie. Then in another episode, Dead Dog Walking, Peter explicitly mentions that he understands pieces of Stewie's speech from time to time. He doesn't catch everything, but enough comes through that he registers it. That is a very different thing from the Comic-Con answer where Peter simply doesn't understand him. Then there is Lois, who is described by the fandom wiki on Family Guy as probably the most confusing case of all. The show has episodes where Lois clearly, unmistakably hears Stewie and responds to him. There are other episodes where she is standing right next to him while he is delivering an elaborate monologue about her imminent destruction, and she treats it as background noise. Francis Griffin, Peter's late father, has been shown having actual conversations with Stewie. Cleveland and Joe, in the episode called Brie Robot, understood Stewie's fashion advice perfectly well when it was relevant to the scene. These moments don't fit a clean rule. They fit something messier and more interesting, which is a show that uses Stewie's comprehensibility as a comedic tool and adjusts the dial depending on what any given scene needs. The theory that fans have built around this inconsistency is actually quite elegant, and it has been floating around for years. The idea is that Family Guy is being told from Stewie's perspective, that the entire show is something like Stewie's internal narration or imagination, filtered through the understanding of a 1-year-old who is simultaneously a genius and someone with very limited real-world experience. In this reading, the adults appear to ignore Stewie not because they literally cannot hear his words, but because from a baby's point of view, that is how adults behave. Adults move through their day on their own agenda. They pick up a baby, they put a baby down, they talk over the baby's head about things the baby cannot fully process. A baby as smart as Stewie would experience this as being invisible, as, speaking clearly, and being deliberately dismissed? That is the emotional reality of being very young in a household full of people with their own complicated lives, and Stewie's genius mind renders it as, they can hear me and they simply do not care. This theory also explains why Stewie's evil schemes never come to fruition, at least in the early seasons. A baby's rage toward a caregiver is real and intense, but it has no outlet. It manifests in fantasy. It manifests in the elaborate imaginings of what the baby would do if it could. Stewie's laser guns and time machines and mind control devices might not be literal inventions. They might be the projections of a very brilliant, very frustrated child who cannot express his needs through normal channels. And then season 19 aired its premiere episode, the one titled Stewie's First Word. And the show actually tried to address this question in a way that was more definitive than anything that had come before. In that episode, Stewie is frustrated. He is at church. The Wi-Fi is bad. It is Lent, which means no cookies. And in a moment of overwhelming irritation, Stewie lets out a swear word, out loud, in church. And the congregation hears it. Everyone hears it. They are shocked. They respond. They understand. And Stewie, after recovering from the chaos this causes, quietly works out a theory. People can understand him when he is feeling something with enough intensity. When the emotion is strong enough, the words break through. By the end of that episode, he says his second canonical word in a moment of genuine tenderness toward Lois, and she hears that too. It is a beautiful little bit of lore that the show built, and it almost makes everything else fit. Almost. Because the show had already spent 18 seasons doing whatever it wanted with Stewie's comprehensibility, and one episode's theory doesn't retrofit that chaos into a clean system. What it does is give the chaos a name. It says the rule is that there is no rule, except in the moments when the emotion demands one. What makes this mystery so enduring is that it is not actually about the mechanics of sound. Nobody watching Family Guy is genuinely confused about why a baby can talk. They accepted that on episode 1. The mystery is about what the show is doing with that concept and why it keeps deliberately refusing to commit to a consistent answer. The answer, when you sit with it, feels intentional. A show that committed to a firm rule, everyone can hear Stewie, or nobody can hear Stewie, would have to give up something. If everyone can hear him, then every plan he makes to harm Lois or take over the world should be stopped immediately by the adults around him, and the tension evaporates. If nobody can hear him, then his conversations with Brian become impossible to explain, and you lose one of the show's most beloved dynamics. The ambiguity is a feature. It is what lets Stewie exist as both a grounded character and a walking cartoon absurdity at the same time. And in a strange way, that ambiguity is a reflection of something true about childhood. The interior lives of children are rich, complex, fully formed. What gets received by the adults around them is a partial transmission at best. Something is always being lost in translation. Stewie Griffin, at his most interesting, is a meditation on that gap. The mystery doesn't resolve. It isn't supposed to. You are meant to keep watching, and keep wondering, and keep finding it funny every time Brian turns to Stewie and says something that only works because the two of them, in this moment, in this scene, are on the same frequency, even if they weren't in the last scene. Even if they won't be in the next one. The show doesn't owe you an answer, and honestly the answer matters less than the question. Because every time you ask it, you are thinking about a baby in a yellow shirt plotting the downfall of civilization, and somehow, impossibly, that is still funny, after more than 25 years. If you are settling in for a long night of mysteries, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. Seriously, I love seeing those. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. It costs nothing, it means everything. And there is a lot more where this is coming from. Section 2. The Lois Griffin hidden past. Who is this woman? Really? Here is something to think about while you get comfortable. Lois Griffin is supposed to be the most normal person in her household. She is the voice of reason. She is the patient one, the sensible one, the one standing in the kitchen who will remind Peter that no, he cannot legally do whatever chaotic thing he is about to do. She is the anchor. She is the baseline. And yet, if you actually catalog what the show has revealed about Lois Griffin over the course of its run, she is arguably the most mysterious and contradictory character on the entire series. Her full name is Lois Patrice Griffin, née Pewterschmidt. She was born the 3rd of June 1958, according to her birthday, as it has been referenced across multiple episodes. She grew up in an extraordinarily wealthy family. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is a billionaire. Her mother, Barbara, known as Babs, is the socialite wife of that billionaire, and was also voiced for years by Alex Borstein, the same actress who plays Lois. Her sister is Carol. Her brother is Patrick, and it is in that list of family members where the first big mystery begins, because Patrick Pewterschmidt spent 30 years locked in a mental institution, and Lois had absolutely no idea he existed. Patrick was hidden away by Carter Pewterschmidt after a traumatic incident when Patrick was young. He witnessed his mother, Babs, in a compromising situation with the comedian and entertainer Jackie Gleason, and the shock of it caused a complete mental breakdown. He was sent to the Brookfield Insane Asylum, and Carter simply never told Lois or Carol that they had a brother. For 3 decades, their entire childhood, their entire adolescence, their adult lives, all of it passed without Lois knowing she had a sibling sitting in an institution not far from everything she had ever known. When she finally discovers the truth and has Patrick briefly released, it turns out he has become a serial killer who targets overweight men in the town, and this storyline is played partially for horror and partially for dark comedy, which is a very specific tonal choice. But the Patrick mystery is just the beginning. The Pewterschmidt family history reaches back much further than Patrick, and what it reveals about Lois's ancestry is quietly one of the most interesting and under-discussed threads in the entire show. In the 4th season episode, The Griffin Family History, Peter passes time by recounting the story of his ancestors while the family is locked in their panic room during a burglary. One of those stories involves Nate Griffin, Peter's ancestor, and a colonial-era woman named Lois Pewterschmidt, who is described in full as Lois Laura Bush, Lynn Cheney Pewterschmidt, which is one of those very specific Family Guy jokes that lives and dies on the absurdity of the name. This ancestor of Lois's secretly began a relationship and started a family with Nate Griffin, in defiance of her father's wishes, and fled with her family when she was discovered. This is the mythological founding moment of the Griffin lineage, and it is also a quiet suggestion that the connection between the Pewterschmidts and the Griffins is not just marital but generational, running back through centuries. This ancestral connection raises an interesting question that the show never fully answers. If an earlier Pewterschmidt and an earlier Griffin were bound together by choice and by flight from wealth, what does that mean for the current Lois and Peter? Are they simply repeating a pattern written into their family's DNA? Lois giving up her wealthy upbringing to be with the working-class Peter mirrors almost exactly what her ancestor did generations before. The show drops this detail and then mostly moves on, but the implication sits there quietly for anyone who notices it. Then there is Lois's religious identity, which is one of the more unusual double-layered mysteries in the show. She considers herself Protestant, but she is ethnically Jewish through her mother Barbara's lineage. This means that by traditional Jewish matrilineal descent, Lois is Jewish, and this fact is something that both her father-in-law Francis Griffin, a devout Catholic, and her own father Carter both found deeply uncomfortable for their own reasons. The show brings this up and uses it for jokes, particularly in the episode Family Goy, where the family discovers Lois's Jewish heritage, and Peter briefly becomes very enthusiastic about claiming a new cultural identity for himself, which goes exactly as well as you might expect. But here is what is quietly interesting about that setup. Lois exists in a kind of permanent state of contested identity. She grew up Protestant in a wealthy WASP household, even though her mother's heritage is Jewish. She married into a Catholic family through Francis, even though neither she nor Peter are particularly devout in any direction. She has a brother who is a serial killer that she didn't know about. She has an ancestor who was a wealthy colonial woman who eloped with an enslaved man. She went to college, or possibly 2 colleges depending on which episode you believe, because the show has cited both Kent State University and Salve Regina University at different points, and both are treated as canonical. She starred in a pornographic film during her college years, which was revealed years after the fact in the episode, and I'm Joyce Kinney when a local news anchor uses the footage to publicly humiliate her. She was a black belt in Taijutsu, something revealed in the episode Lethal Weapons, which means that hidden beneath the patient, piano-playing housewife exterior is a woman who can cause serious physical damage if pushed. She briefly became mayor of the town in the episode It Takes a Village Idiot, and I Married One, suggesting she has genuine political capability that she simply never exercised. She worked as a phone sex operator in Call Girl, secretly, without telling Peter for some time. She has a brain tumor. Supposedly, she has claimed at various points that the stress of being married to Peter has caused neurological damage. Whether that is a joke or a piece of actual canon is left ambiguous, which feels appropriate given everything else about her. And perhaps the strangest thread of all is the suggestion, dropped in a handful of episodes and then never properly resolved, that Meg's biological father might not be Peter at all. This implication surfaces in a few different moments. The character of Stan Thompson is mentioned in connection with Meg's parentage in a way that the show never bothers to confirm or deny. Peter does not seem to have a paternal bond with Meg in the same way he does, however inconsistently, with Stewie and Chris. Some fans have pointed to this as a hidden explanation for Peter's particular cruelty toward Meg, that on some level, he knows or suspects that she is not his daughter and cannot articulate that suspicion, so it comes out as hostility instead. The show has never confirmed this. It probably never will. But the hints have been there long enough that they feel less like accidents and more like deliberate choices to leave a door slightly ajar. There is also Lois's documented medical complexity. As written into the show's history, she has had an unusual number of pregnancies beyond the 3 children the audience knows. The show has, across various episodes and speculative counts, implied that she may have had as many as 8 pregnancies, including miscarriages, an abortion mentioned in partial terms of endearment, and other outcomes. Some of these are clearly jokes, but cumulatively they paint a picture of a woman whose life before the audience met her was significantly more complicated and significantly more weighted than the cheerful suburban homemaker surface suggests. What is the real Lois Griffin? Is she the patient, slightly worn-down mother who keeps the chaos of 31 Spooner Street from becoming a full emergency? Is she the woman with a violent martial arts background, a secret career in adult entertainment, a hidden Jewish heritage, and a brother locked away for murder? Is she the descendant of a woman who risked everything to be with someone her family disapproved of? Is she the mayor? Is she the phone sex worker? Is she the pianist? The answer is that she is all of these things, held together by a television show that never had to reconcile them into a single coherent person, because the format doesn't require coherence, it requires the appearance of coherence while actually serving a joke in any given moment. Lois Griffin is the most normal character on the show, and she is also, by the evidence, one of its most layered and least understood ones. The mystery of who she really is lives in the space between what the show tells you she is and what it has accidentally revealed over 20-plus years of storytelling. You can see the outline of a genuinely fascinating character underneath all the running gags about Peter's stupidity. A woman who had every advantage of wealth and still chose something messier. A woman who has secrets she carries without letting them show. A woman who, in a different kind of show, might have been the protagonist. Instead, she is the wife of Peter Griffin, the most patient woman in Rhode Island, with a black belt and a past she doesn't advertise. And that tension between what you see and what the show keeps accidentally showing you is the mystery at the center of her entire character. Section 3. The intelligence of Peter Griffin. How dumb is he, actually? Peter Louvenborough Griffin Sr., working-class man of Quahog, Rhode Island, former safety inspector at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, later a shipping clerk at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, husband of Lois, father of 3 children and 1 highly intelligent dog by circumstance, beer enthusiast, foam finger enthusiast, a man who once declared war on his own neighborhood and briefly ran his own nation on a technicality. On paper, Peter is simply a stupid man. The show tells you this within the first few minutes of its existence. He is the lovable idiot of the premise, the engine of chaos from which all other complications spring. He makes bad decisions because he doesn't think things through. He misunderstands situations because he doesn't have the cognitive horsepower to correctly interpret them. He is the dumb dad of the dumb dad sitcom tradition, done up in animation, and that is the agreement you enter into when you watch the show. But here's the thing. The deeper you look at Peter Griffin, the harder it becomes to decide what kind of dumb he actually is. Because the mystery of Peter Griffin's intelligence is not as simple as his intelligence being low. The mystery is that his intelligence appears to operate on entirely different rules depending on what the episode needs, and those rules, laid out across 20-plus seasons, describe something genuinely strange. Start with the baseline. In the early seasons, Peter is presented as someone of below-average intelligence who nonetheless functions as a recognizable adult human. He holds a job. He drives a car. He can navigate social situations, after a fashion. He understands cause and effect, even if he frequently ignores it. He has preferences and opinions and, crucially, he can learn. Across the first 3 seasons especially, Peter is the kind of person who does something stupid, suffers the consequences, recognizes what went wrong, and makes an effort, however bungling, to set it right. That feedback loop is what separates a comedic character from a void of empathy. Early Peter is dumb, in a way that still implies a functioning mind underneath. Then there is the other evidence. Evidence that suggests Peter Griffin is not simply below average, but might exist in a cognitive category all his own. The show has, at various points, established that Peter has what are called diminished mental faculties in a clinical sense. In the episode Petarded, the family plays a trivia game and Peter loses to Stewie and subsequently discovers through official testing that he is legally classified as mentally handicapped. This is a full episode built around Peter receiving a medical and legal designation, which means the show is establishing a canon fact about his cognitive function. And yet in that same episode, Peter uses that designation to escape consequences for his behavior, which implies he understands the designation well enough to exploit it strategically, which is a fairly sophisticated thing for someone with diminished faculties to do. In the episode Patriot Games, Peter is scouted to play professional football, American football, the sport that requires complex play memorization, rapid field assessment, and the ability to react in real time to changing physical situations. He performs well enough to attract the attention of a professional team. That is a very different skill profile than the one you'd expect from someone who cannot reliably identify what year it is. In And Then There Were Fewer, an Agatha Christie-style mystery episode where characters are murdered one by one at a dinner party, Peter makes several deductions that are genuinely accurate, even if they are wrapped in his usual chaotic delivery. His mind tracks the events of the evening in a way that suggests the capacity for logical reasoning, even if that capacity is usually applied to figuring out which bar to go to. Peter has been shown, in various episodes, to have a profound and detailed knowledge of certain niche subjects. He has near encyclopedic knowledge of specific films and television shows from the 70s and 80s. He can quote dialogue accurately. He can reconstruct plots. He has strong aesthetic opinions about entertainment. This kind of specialized knowledge is not something that exists outside of a functional memory and a genuine capacity for retention. It is just memory applied to something that the people around Peter don't value. Then there is the biological mystery underneath all of this, which is the question of what Peter Griffin is actually made of. His durability is a recurring theme that goes beyond cartoon physics. He has been hit by cars, fallen from enormous heights, been maimed, shot, set on fire, and subjected to levels of physical trauma that would be immediately fatal in the real world, and often should be immediately fatal even by cartoon standards. In one famous moment, he falls down a flight of stairs and then sits on the floor making the same pained sound for what feels like an eternity. But in the next scene, he is fine. In another episode, his legs are destroyed in an accident, and then by the following scene, he is walking normally again. His body seems to be operating outside of normal biological rules in a way that nobody on the show comments on, which makes it both a running joke and a genuine mystery. One theory that has circulated in fan communities for years holds that Peter Griffin might not be entirely human. This connects to the bloodline mystery he was raised by Francis Griffin, who is not his biological father, and his real father is Mickey McFinnigan, an Irishman who holds the honorary position of town drunk in his village and who won that title through a competitive drinking contest. When Peter meets Mickey and challenges him to a drinking contest to prove his parentage, Peter wins. He defeats the man who may be the greatest drinker in his village. This is a superhuman feat that the show treats as a confirmation of family connection, rather than something that requires medical attention. McFinnigan's ability to drink extraordinary amounts without dying, and Peter's apparent inheritance of that ability, combined with Peter's physical invulnerability to trauma, suggests that the Griffin men, the biological Griffin men, starting with Mickey, are not operating on standard human tolerances. What exactly they are instead is something the show has never clarified and presumably never will. But the evidence sits there across dozens of episodes. The most fascinating version of the Peter intelligence mystery, though, is the one that asks not how smart he is, but what he would be if he were smart. The show has answered this question in specific episodes where external factors temporarily alter Peter's cognitive function. In PTV, when Peter is fighting the FCC's censorship, he makes arguments that are coherent and legally informed. In He's Too Sexy for His Fat, when Peter becomes attractive through liposuction and develops a completely different social confidence, you can see the outlines of a person who might have navigated the world very differently with different circumstances. There is an episode where Peter's IQ temporarily increases, and he becomes a legitimately thoughtful, considered, emotionally aware human being who looks back at his usual behavior with genuine distress. That episode is interesting not because of the jokes it makes, though it makes several good ones, but because of what Peter says while he has access to a higher cognitive function. He is sad. He is bewildered by his own past behavior. He does not recognize the man he has been for most of his life. And then the effect reverses and he returns to his default state and does not remember any of it, and the show continues as usual. But that window reveals something. The stupidity is not an absence of something better underneath. It is a wall in front of something that exists but cannot get through. And whether that wall is biological or circumstantial, or simply the result of a childhood in a household where he was told repeatedly that he was not special and not valued a childhood, the show has shown in flashbacks more than once, is one more question that Family Guy poses without ever quite committing to an answer. Peter Griffin is as smart as the episode needs him to be. He is as dumb as the joke requires. He is medically classified as intellectually impaired and also capable of strategic thinking within specific contexts. He is physically indestructible by most standards and yet experiences pain in real time. He has deep knowledge of specific cultural artifacts and absolutely no knowledge of things deemed generally important. He is a mystery wrapped in a flannel shirt and served with a side of Pawtucket Patriot Ale, and after all these years, the show hasn't explained him. It has only accumulated evidence of his contradictions and left the jury permanently out. Section 4. Brian Griffin, the mystery of the dog who is not a dog. Brian Edward Griffin is 10 years old. He is a white Labrador retriever. He was picked up as a stray by Peter, somewhere in the early history of the Griffin family. He now lives at 31 Spooner Street, drinks martinis, writes bad fiction, drives a Toyota Prius with the license plate BRI D0G, and holds philosophical conversations about the nature of existence with a baby. There are many dogs in the world of Family Guy. They are regular dogs. They bark. They run. They do dog things. Brian does not do dog things. Brian does human things, exclusively, and the show has committed to this almost entirely without comment. The question of why Brian is what he is, not just a talking dog, but a dog who is functionally indistinguishable from a human being in terms of cognition, personality, aspiration, and emotional life, is one of the most genuinely mysterious things the show has put in front of its audience. Because unlike Stewie's intellect, which the show frames as an anomaly and a joke, Brian's humanity is treated as simply normal. Seth MacFarlane has confirmed that Brian Griffin is his favorite character to voice, and that Brian is the one character for whom he uses his own speaking voice without alteration. Every other main character MacFarlane voices, Peter, Stewie, Quagmire, involves some degree of vocal construction. Brian is MacFarlane talking, essentially in his most natural register. That is an interesting piece of information because it suggests that Brian is, in some way, the character MacFarlane identifies with most directly. The things Brian aspires to writing, intellectual life, culture, authenticity, are the things MacFarlane himself has pursued. The things Brian struggles with, the gap between ambition and achievement, the tendency to be too smart for comfort but not smart enough for success, feel autobiographically shaded in a way that the other characters do not. But within the universe of the show, the question remains, why is Brian like this? The fan theory that has gotten the most mileage over the years involves the CIA. It sounds absurd, but follow the logic for a moment. Family Guy and American Dad exist in the same universe. This has been established on screen across multiple crossover moments. American Dad features Roger Smith, an alien who works with the CIA. The CIA in the Family Guy universe is not a normal intelligence agency. It is an organization that deals with genuinely supernatural and paranormal situations. In this context, a theory emerged that Brian Griffin is a CIA genetic experiment, a hybrid created intentionally to look like an ordinary dog while possessing human-level cognition and social function. This would explain why he speaks. It would explain why he operates as a full human person in terms of his inner life. It would explain why he exists as the only one of his kind in his immediate environment. He is a prototype. The show has given this theory some accidental support across various moments. Brian's origin story, told in the episode Brian, Portrait of a Dog, establishes that Peter found him on the road as a stray and brought him home. The episode frames this as a heartwarming moment of connection between a man and a dog, but it doesn't explain where Brian came from before that encounter. A fully formed, cognitively adult dog, capable of human speech, simply appeared on the side of a road in Rhode Island. Nobody has ever questioned where he was before that. Nobody has ever asked who, if anyone, made him what he is. Brian has also, on more than one occasion, displayed abilities that go beyond anything a dog, even a supernaturally intelligent dog, should possess. He has written novels, bad ones, but still novels. He has worked as a journalist. He has taught at a community college. He has held professional employment in multiple fields, which means he has legal documentation of some kind. A social security number, at minimum, given that he pays taxes in at least one episode. The bureaucratic infrastructure of Brian's human life exists and is treated as given, and nobody at the DMV or the IRS or any of the other institutions he interacts with ever pauses to note that he is a dog. Then there is the question of Brian's romantic and sexual life, which the show treats with a casualness that itself raises questions. Brian has romantic relationships with human women. He has had relationships with other dogs. He has fathered a son, Dylan, who is presented as a fully human-looking teenage boy, the child of Brian, and a human woman, which should be biologically impossible. Dylan makes several appearances, has a complete and coherent personality, and his existence is treated as unremarkable. The implications of this are not addressed. They are left hanging in the air, like so much else in this show, as a mystery that the audience is free to sit with and not one that the writers feel any obligation to resolve. The theory that Brian is actually the writer of Family Guy itself, that the entire show is his unfinished novel, which is why everyone has exaggerated flaws, is another layer worth spending a moment on. A Redditor articulated this theory with the observation that the only person in the Griffin family with a specific reason to dislike Meg is Brian, following the events of the Season 5 episode Barely Legal. In that episode, Brian accidentally kisses Meg and she develops an obsession with him. From that point, Brian sees Meg as a problem and a source of discomfort. If the show is Brian's novel, his feelings about Meg explain why every other character also seems to find her unpleasant. He wrote the story to process his experiences, and the people in it are shaped by his perceptions. Peter is maximally stupid because that is how Brian has always seen him. Stewie is maximally brilliant because Brian genuinely admires Stewie's intellect and their friendship. Lois is complicated because Brian's feelings about her are complicated. He has held feelings for her since the early seasons and projects those feelings into her characterization. This theory also explains something genuinely puzzling about the show's structure, which is the way certain storylines seem to exist primarily to illuminate Brian's emotional state rather than the lives of the other characters. When Brian's novel fails, the episode is about Brian's failure. When Brian falls in love, the episode is about Brian's emotional landscape. When Brian makes a mistake, it is Brian who processes and narrates the consequences. The show consistently returns to Brian as its emotional center in a way that doesn't quite fit a supporting character. It fits a narrator. None of this is confirmed. All of it lives in the space of theory and implication. But the mystery of Brian Griffin, of why he exists as what he is, of where he came from, of what he actually represents, is rich enough to fill its own series of essays. He is the character the show holds closest and explains least. And in a show built on explaining everything through jokes, the character who gets no explanation is the most interesting one by default. Section 5. The Quagmire Paradox. The man who is 61 and also 32 and also neither. Glenn Quagmire was born Glenn Quagelchek. He is a former Navy ensign. He is now a commercial airline pilot. He lives at 29 Spooner Street, one house away from the Griffins. He is, according to his driver's license, as displayed in the episode Foxy Lady, 61 years old. He does not look 61 years old. He does not behave 61 years old, in the ways that matter for plot purposes. He runs, he fights, he has the energy and apparent physical capacity of a man in his 30s. And in earlier episodes, before the specific number 61 was introduced into the canon, he was implied to be roughly the same age as Peter, who is in his 40s. This is one of the most specific and most unresolved numerical contradictions in the entire show. Because 61 is not a number that slides naturally past you. When the show puts an actual age on a character's driver's license, in a close-up shot, legible to the audience, that is a choice. It is meant to be read. And then the show continues with a character who does not organically fit that number and never really addresses the gap. Quagmire's explanation, given in the same episode, is that he maintains his youthful appearance by eating carrots. This is said with a straight face and then dropped. It is both an explanation and obviously not a real explanation. The show is acknowledging the weirdness of the number and declining to seriously account for it, which is very different from explaining it. But there are other mysteries stacked inside the Quagmire timeline that are even harder to reconcile. The episode called A Fistful of Meg includes a recollection of a sexual encounter Quagmire had in 1986. If he was 61 when his driver's license was shown in Foxy Lady, and if we take that episode as taking place roughly around its air date in 2009, then in 1986, Quagmire would have been approximately 38 years old. That is a coherent timeline. 38-year-old Quagmire in 1986, 61-year-old Quagmire in 2009. The math works. Except then there is the episode Meet the Quagmires, the time travel episode in which Peter goes back to 1984 and encounters the younger versions of everyone. Young Quagmire in 1984 is presented as a roughly contemporary peer of young Peter, who at the time would have been approximately 18 years old. If Quagmire were 61 in 2009, he would have been 34 in 1984, nearly twice the apparent age of the young man shown in that episode. The show did not render 1984 Quagmire as a significantly older person than 1984 Peter. They are presented as equivalents, as members of the same peer group chasing the same girls at the same dances. That doesn't match a 34-year-old and an 18-year-old. It matches two people of roughly similar ages. So which is true? Was the 61 on the license a genuine statement of canon, or was it a visual joke, Quagmire's own false documentation, created to make himself appear older and therefore more distinguished, or perhaps younger, or perhaps just different? For some purpose only he understands? A man who spends as much creative energy on his romantic pursuits as Quagmire would be exactly the kind of person to carry misleading identification. It would be consistent with his personality in a way that an accidental continuity error would not be. The episode called Quagmire's Mom adds another layer to the origin mystery. His mother Crystal is revealed, and their relationship is presented as deeply dysfunctional in ways the show hints at without fully committing to. His father's storyline, in the episode Quagmire's Dad, involves a transition that Quagmire responds to with a complexity that suggests his family history is considerably more tangled than the show has fully explored. And then there is the matter of his history before Spooner Street. The Navy ensign backstory places him in a military context where he met Peter, which is part of the established lore. But the specifics of what he did in the Navy, where he was stationed, what he experienced during that period, and how he transitioned from military service to commercial aviation are largely uncharted. An ensign is a junior officer rank. The path from junior Navy officer to commercial airline pilot is not impossible. Naval aviators do make that transition, but the show has never walked through it in any meaningful detail. What the show has established, piece by piece across many seasons, is a portrait of a man whose present behavior is the product of a history that shaped him in specific and damaging ways. In the episode The Stowaway, Quagmire discloses that he lost his virginity at 6 years old when an adult broke into his home and assaulted him. The show presents this as a backstory detail in a scene that is attempting to explain the roots of his adult behavior, but the detail itself is disturbing in a way the show doesn't quite know what to do with. It is the rare moment where the comedy falls away and something true and terrible about character formation is implied. The Quagmire paradox is ultimately a paradox of function. He functions in most scenes as a comedic device. He is the exaggerated ID of male sexual behavior, made cartoonish enough that the audience can laugh at him while also finding him, in his own strange way, something like lovable. But underneath the cartoon, there is a character with an age that doesn't fit, an origin that's incompletely sketched, a family history that's been deliberately kept murky, and a set of behaviors that the show itself, in its more serious moments, has tried to trace back to real psychological causes. He is 61 and he looks 32. He is a comic villain and occasionally a genuine friend. He is the guy who hates Brian with the most articulate and specific fury the show has ever produced. His speech in Jerome is the New Black, where he catalogs exactly why he despises Brian, is one of the most precisely written character moments in the series, and he is also the guy who, in other episodes, extends genuine warmth and loyalty to the people around him when they need it. The mystery of Glenn Quagmire is that the show built a character vivid enough to feel like a real person and then consistently refused to explain what kind of real person he actually is. The age on the license is still 61. The math still doesn't work, and he is still out there, in the house next door to the Griffins, somehow young-looking enough to be a convincing pilot, old enough to have had experiences that the show has only scratched the surface of. Section 6. The Meg Griffin Conspiracy. Why does everyone hate her? Before we go any further, let's acknowledge the obvious. Meg Griffin is the most normal person in her family. That is true. It is genuinely true. She is a teenager who wants to fit in, wants her parents to be proud of her, wants friends who like her, and a boyfriend who treats her well, and a seat at the table where the family is not always terrible to her. These are among the most basic and universal things a human being can want, and Meg wants them with a sincerity that the show, in its more honest moments, clearly recognizes. And yet she is treated by her family, by her peers, by strangers, and by the universe of the show itself, with a contempt that escalated from mild teasing in the early seasons to something that by seasons 8 through 14 had no real precedent in mainstream animated television. She became not just the butt of jokes, but the justification for a philosophy of cruelty, a character whose suffering was framed by the show itself as somehow deserved and necessary. The real-world explanation for why this happened is not especially mysterious. Seth MacFarlane has said in interviews that the male writers in the room didn't know how to write a teenage girl character. They found her boring. They found it easier to make her the target. The laziness of that is its own kind of answer. But within the world of the show, the question of why Meg Griffin is universally despised by people who have never met her, by adults who should know better, by her own parents who occasionally appear to forget she exists, is something fans have theorized about for years and never fully resolved. The most widely circulated fan theory about Meg begins with a premise that reframes the entire show. The theory holds that Family Guy takes place inside the mind of Peter Griffin, who is actually a patient in a mental institution. The explanation for why he is institutionalized is that his family is dead. All of them died in a car accident, and the person responsible for that accident was Meg. In this reading, the pre-crash Meg was a beautiful, popular, competent teenager, the opposite of how the show presents her. She was the caregiver for her younger brother Chris, who had developmental challenges stemming from oxygen deprivation at birth. One night, Meg was driving with Chris in the car. There was an accident. Chris died. Lois, unable to cope with the loss of her children, died by suicide shortly after, still pregnant with Stewie. Peter, the sole survivor, was committed. Everything in the show is his imagination. The Griffins, alive and chaotic and dysfunctional, are how his mind keeps them present. Stewie's extraordinary intelligence is how Peter imagined the baby Lois was carrying might have been a genius, a wonder. Cleveland and Quagmire and Joe are his real friends who visit him in the facility, and inside his mind they appear as neighbors and bar companions. And Meg, the Meg of the show, is distorted by Peter's grief and rage into something barely recognizable. He cannot love her because she is the reason everyone else is gone. He cannot forgive her. So his mind makes her unlovable by design, makes everyone treat her the way his grief demands she be treated. There is a version of this theory that centers the Seahorse Seashell Party episode as a moment of profound psychological significance. In that episode, Meg stands up for herself. She tells her family the truth about how they treat her. She makes them feel it. And then the family, without Meg as their communal target, turns on each other. They fracture, they fall apart, and Meg, in the end, takes the burden back. She tells Brian she understands that her role is to absorb the family's negative energy so that they can function. She agrees to go back to being the punching bag. Within the mental institution reading of the show, this scene is Peter's subconscious briefly surfacing and recognizing what it has done to Meg in his imagination. The grief and the rage construct a version of Meg that deserves to be punished, but some part of his mind, some real-world remaining fragment of love, surfaces in the moment of her confrontation with the family and acknowledges the truth of what she is saying. And then the defense mechanism reasserts itself, and Meg agrees to go back to being the target, because Peter cannot sustain the acknowledgement. It is too painful. It implicates him too directly in something he cannot take responsibility for. The second major theory about Meg is less cinematic but equally troubling in its implications. This one holds that the pre-cancellation and post-cancellation seasons of Family Guy are actually different universes. That the Family Guy, which ran from 1999 to 2002, and the Family Guy, which returned in 2005, are not the same continuous timeline, but two parallel versions of the same family story. In the first universe, Meg is treated as a slightly unfortunate but essentially loved member of a dysfunctional family. In the second universe, she is treated as something close to a non-person. The distinction is not the result of character development. It is the result of a dimensional shift that the characters are unaware of. This theory has accidental support from the episode Back to the Pilot, in which Brian and Stewie travel back to the events of the very first episode. The version of the show they visit is visually and tonally consistent with the early season's rougher, warmer, more grounded. When they return to the present, they return to a show that feels different. Whether this is intended as commentary, accident, or simple acknowledgement of the show's evolution is unclear. The third and most pragmatic theory is the simplest. Meg is the scapegoat, and the show built her into that role because scapegoating is psychologically real, and the Griffins are, beneath all the comedy, a psychologically damaged family. Peter was raised by a stepfather who told him repeatedly that he was not wanted and not valued. Lois was raised by a father who controlled and dismissed her. They have carried those patterns into their own home, and Meg, the least defended, the most ordinary, the one without Stewie's genius or Chris's amiable obliviousness, or the specific protections of being the baby, became the repository for the family's worst impulses. This is what abuse looks like when you dress it in cartoon clothing and call it a running gag. Seth MacFarlane has also hinted at the possibility that Stan Thompson, a character mentioned in passing across a few episodes, may be Meg's biological father rather than Peter. If this is true, if Peter knows or suspects it, even without being able to articulate the knowing, it adds one more layer to the particular shape of his cruelty toward her. It would mean that his inability to love her the way fathers love daughters is not simply personality. It is an incoherent emotional response to a situation he has never confronted directly. The show eventually walked back the worst of the Meg abuse, beginning somewhere around season 14 and continuing into the later seasons, as more women joined the writing staff and pushed back against the dynamic that had been built up over a decade. By the time the show reached its 20s in terms of season count, Meg was getting episodes where she was capable and tough, and occasionally even triumphant. But the accumulation of what came before it is too large to simply revise away. The Meg mystery is still the Meg mystery, even if the present tense show has moved on from the worst of it. Why does everyone hate her? The show says it's because she's undesirable. The theories say it's because she is the emotional load-bearing wall of a family that cannot function without someone to blame. And the most honest answer, the one that exists in the space between the theories and the text, is that she became a mirror. The way the Griffins treat Meg is the most accurate measure of who they really are, and the longer you watch it, the harder it is to find the joke. Section 7. The death and resurrection problem: who can actually die in this universe? At some point in any long-running narrative, the question of what death means becomes relevant. In live-action television, death is mostly permanent, or at least it used to be. In animation, the rules are more flexible by design. Cartoon characters absorb enormous amounts of physical punishment, recover instantaneously, and the audience accepts this as a matter of genre convention. Nobody is confused when Tom and Jerry both walk away from what would be fatal impacts in the real world. The cartoon space is understood to be physically elastic. Family Guy operates inside that convention but has, across its run, complicated it in ways that are actually very interesting when you line them up. Because Family Guy has killed characters and meant it, it has also unkilled characters in ways that were explicitly framed as meaningful rather than casual reversals. And it has a whole category of deaths that exist in some uncertain liminal space where it is genuinely unclear whether they are canon events or not. Let's start with the most dramatic example. In Season 12, the episode Life of Brian aired. Brian Griffin was hit by a car while retrieving a ball in the street, and he died. Not cartoon died, where the character shakes it off in the next scene. He was brought to a veterinary emergency room, the family gathered, and he passed away with Stewie present. The show held the moment. There was genuine grief in the animation and the voice performances. Brian was buried. The family got a new dog. The episode ended. Fans responded with a ferocity that surprised even people who had been watching the internet for years. Brian's death trended internationally on social media. Online petitions appeared. The outrage was enormous and immediate and extremely personal, in a way that doesn't usually happen in response to the death of a cartoon character. 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie used a time travel device he had stolen from his past self to go back to the moment before the car hit Brian and push him out of the way. Brian survived. He returned to the show as though the death had not happened. Everything reset. The producers described this as a planned stunt they intended to kill Brian. Feel the weight of that, and then reverse it. Whether that is true or whether Brian was only brought back because of the fan response is a question that has never been definitively answered, and both versions have people who believe them. But the mechanics of what happened raise a mystery that goes beyond the stunt. If Stewie's time travel successfully prevents Brian's death, then there are now 2 versions of the timeline existing simultaneously. The version where Brian died and Stewie had to go back and fix it, and the altered version where Brian survives. In the altered version, Stewie's actions create a paradox, because the emotional weight that drove him to steal the time device and go back is the grief of Brian's death, which, in the new timeline, never occurs. Did Stewie remember both timelines? Does he carry the memory of Brian's death even in the world where it didn't happen? The show doesn't address this. It brings Brian back and moves on. Death has made several appearances in the show in a more literal and personified form. The character of Death, voiced by Adam Carolla in his original appearances, is an actual entity who lives in the world and interacts with the characters. He has a house, he has a social life, he has conversations with Peter Griffin that go on for multiple episodes. The existence of a personified Death as a character raises its own set of unanswered questions about how mortality actually works in this fictional world. If Death is a person you can talk to, a person who has off days and can be distracted from his duties, then the rules of who dies and when are presumably subject to negotiation in ways they aren't in most fictional universes. Diane Simmons, the co-anchor of Quahog's local news and a character who appeared throughout the series, was killed in the episode And Then There Were Fewer. And unlike Brian's death, hers was not reversed. She died and she stayed dead, and subsequent seasons simply don't have her in them. No time travel, no resurrection. The contrast between the permanence of Simmons's death and the impermanence of Brian's death reveals something about how the show decides which deaths count. The closer a character is to the emotional center of the show, the more reversible their death apparently is. Simmons was a recurring character but not a core one. Brian was a member of the main cast. The show's willingness to commit to consequences scales inversely with how much the audience cares about the character. This creates a functional rule for the universe that nobody in the show acknowledges. Proximity to the Griffin family confers a kind of immortality. The further you are from the emotional center of the story, the more vulnerable you are to permanent consequence. Then there is the whole category of what might be called the off-screen dead characters who are killed in the background of action sequences, collateral damage in Peter's various disasters, or in the elaborate fights with Ernie the giant chicken, or in the sheer chaos that follows wherever the main characters go. These deaths are numerous. Buildings collapse, cars are destroyed with people inside them. Entire crowds of extras are implied to have been seriously harmed or killed across multiple episodes. None of it sticks. None of it accretes into the kind of consequence that would require the main characters to address it. The town resets. The body count that Family Guy has accumulated across its runtime, if taken seriously, would be staggering. But taking it seriously is not what the show is asking you to do. And then there is the question of Stewie's theoretical deaths. In the episode Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, Brian dies by eating chocolate and the event is treated with some emotional weight. But it is subsequently ignored by later episodes, which position Brian as alive and continue his storylines without comment. In the canonical universe, was this event real? Did it happen? The show's response is essentially a shrug. Sometimes things happen that are for a specific episode, and the ongoing series continues without incorporating them as permanent facts. The result of all of this is a universe where death is real and not real simultaneously, depending on which death, which character, and what the show needs at any given moment. The mystery of who can actually die is solved only provisionally for each death in the moment. There is no rule that holds across all cases. The rule is that the story decides, and the story is not interested in consistency for its own sake. Section 8. The Geography Mystery. Where exactly is Quahog, and what are its rules? The town is called Quahog. It is located in Rhode Island. Beyond those two facts, almost nothing about Quahog's geography is stable. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the United States. It covers roughly 1,545 square miles of actual land, with a total area including water of about 1,212 square miles. It is bounded by Massachusetts to the north and east, Connecticut to the west, and the Atlantic Ocean to the south. A real Rhode Island town would have all of these constraints shaping its geography. Quahog does not behave like a real Rhode Island town. It behaves like a space that is as large as any given episode requires it to be. In some episodes, it appears to be a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone and the local news station covers events in a handful of recognizable neighborhoods. In other episodes, it contains landmarks and venues and districts that would require a city several times the size of anything that could realistically fit in Rhode Island. The local airport appears to handle international flights. The stadium hosts professional sporting events. The downtown area has skyscrapers visible in certain establishing shots. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter, Cleveland, Quagmire, and Joe spend most of their social time, is a constant. Its interior layout is fairly consistent across the seasons, making it one of the most stable physical locations in the show's geography. Spooner Street, where most of the main characters live, is similarly consistent in its basic configuration. But beyond those anchors, Quahog expands and contracts according to narrative need. This would be an unremarkable observation about a cartoon's relationship with geography if the show did not, on several occasions, seem to take its own geography seriously. There are episodes where specific distances and travel times matter to the plot. There are episodes where the layout of the town is referenced in ways that create expectations the show then doesn't consistently honor. The show acts like it has a geography and then behaves like it doesn't. One of the most interesting geographical mysteries involves the town's apparent population and social structure. Quahog seems to have a fixed social ecosystem in which the same people recur in every public setting, the same extras appear at the bar, at the school, at the grocery store, at civic events. The town's population seems to be simultaneously large enough to support a local television news operation with a full anchor team, a police department, a hospital, an airport, and a professional football team, and small enough that Peter Griffin is personally acquainted with the mayor, the local anchorman, a recurring selection of council members, and most of the local business owners. The mayor is for a long stretch of the show's run Adam West, playing a version of himself that functions as a recurring character. Adam West, the real person, the actor who played Batman in the 1966 television series, agreed to play a fictionalized version of himself as the mayor of a cartoon town on a Fox animated comedy. He did this for years, and was, by most accounts, an enormously good sport about the character the show created, which is to say a version of Adam West who was peculiar, easily distracted, and given to non-sequitur behavior that the show played for surreal comedy. After Adam West's death in real life in June of 2017, the show had to address the character of Mayor West, and eventually did so with an episode dealing with his passing. But the show's relationship with the Adam West mayor character is itself a small mystery of tone and intent. Was Mayor West meant to be a satire of political ineffectiveness? A loving tribute to a classic entertainer? A running joke about celebrity cameos and self-aware television? All three simultaneously? The show never committed to any single reading, which is consistent with how it handles most things that require sustained commitment to a position. The town also has a peculiar relationship with its own history. In flashback episodes, Quahog appears in its colonial founding, its Revolutionary War period, and various historical moments, always populated by ancestors of the current characters. This creates the implication that the town has been continuously inhabited by the same family lines for centuries, and that the social geography of Spooner Street in the present is somehow a direct continuation of something established at the founding of the settlement. It is a strange and somewhat grand thing for a comedy to imply about itself, and the show seems only intermittently aware that it is doing it. The surrounding state of Rhode Island appears in the show through specific references: the University of Rhode Island, certain coastal geography, the general social and cultural sensibility of southern New England. But Rhode Island in the real world does not have a professional football team. It does not have a Major League Baseball team. Quahog does, or at least has access to one, through the Quahog Patriots adjacent references that appear from time to time. The show exists in a version of New England where the rules of sports geography are slightly different, or possibly where Quahog is simply large enough to support things that the actual state of Rhode Island cannot. The rules of Quahog are the rules of a set. They are determined not by internal logic but by what any given episode needs the town to contain or to preclude. The mystery is not that the geography is inconsistent. That would be unremarkable for an animated comedy. The mystery is that the show so often seems to want you to believe the geography is consistent, to invest in the town as a real place with a real identity, and then fails to maintain that investment from week to week. Quahog is real when you're watching it and fictional when you're thinking about it, which is a strange quality for a place to have. It is simultaneously a specific corner of a specific small state and a space that exists entirely outside of any real-world constraint. That tension is part of why the town works as a setting. It gives the show a physical anchor that can be infinitely resized. But it is also why, if you sit quietly and try to draw a map of Quahog in your head, the map keeps changing. Section 9. Cleveland's Departure and the Spin-off Continuity Collapse. For the first 7 seasons of Family Guy, Cleveland Orenthal Brown lived next door to the Griffins. He was quiet and deliberate where Peter was loud and impulsive. He was the calming center of the friend group, the one who could offer genuine perspective slowly, in his characteristic measured cadence while the others were too busy being chaotic to hear it. He was also the frequent victim of one of the show's most reliable running gags. Peter, through one accident or another, would always destroy the front wall of Cleveland's bathroom while Cleveland was in the bathtub, and Cleveland would always look at the wreckage of his bathroom wall, say some variation of "what the hell" and "no, no, no," and then crash to the ground in his bathtub while it slid off the now-missing floor. In 2009, Cleveland left. He left in the pilot episode of The Cleveland Show, a spin-off series that Fox had greenlit after the success of Family Guy's revival. The narrative reason for his departure was relatively clean. His divorce from Loretta had been finalized, Loretta had gotten the house, and Cleveland, tired of being on the receiving end of Peter's chaos, decided to take his son Cleveland Jr. and make a fresh start. He moved to Stool Bend, Virginia, reconnected with a high school sweetheart named Donna Tubbs, and married into a new blended family. The Cleveland Show ran for 4 seasons before Fox canceled it in 2013. It returned Cleveland and his family to Quahog in the Family Guy episode He's Blah Ack in season 12, and Cleveland resumed his role in the show's ensemble. But the transition created a series of continuity puzzles that the show handled with varying degrees of interest and various outcomes. The first and most obvious puzzle was what happened to Cleveland's house during his absence. The building did not get a new tenant. It sat largely vacant on Spooner Street for approximately 4 real-world years, and for an indeterminate amount of in-universe time. Nobody moved in. The show occasionally used the empty house for specific episode purposes, but it never established a permanent new occupant, which could be read as either narrative caution, leaving the door open for Cleveland's return, or simply as the show not wanting to commit to a new neighbor storyline when the existing cast was already large. The second puzzle was the Donna question. When Cleveland married Donna Tubbs in the spinoff, that marriage became canon. When he returned to Quahog, Donna came with him, and Donna's relationship with the existing characters, particularly her dynamic with Lois, was not seamlessly established. The show had to do some work to integrate 2 women into the same social ecosystem who had not previously shared a fictional universe. The He's Blah Ack episode opens with exactly that friction, as Donna and Lois's personalities immediately create conflict that threatens to damage the Cleveland-Peter friendship before it is re-established. The third and most genuinely complex puzzle is the question of what Cleveland Jr. is like when he is not in Quahog. In the original Family Guy run, Cleveland Jr. was an energetic, athletic, slightly hyperactive child. In the Cleveland Show, he appeared as a much larger, much slower, much more thoughtful and introverted adolescent. The explanation offered within the show was that Cleveland Jr. changed between seasons, during the period when the family was in Stool Bend. When he returned to Quahog, the new Cleveland Jr., larger, gentler, more philosophically inclined, came with his family. This is technically consistent within the narrative. Kids change, adolescence is transformative, but the degree of change between the Cleveland Jr. of early Family Guy and the Cleveland Jr. of The Cleveland Show And post-return Family Guy is so dramatic that it reads less like character growth and more like a replacement. The personality shift is total rather than partial, and the show never spent any time within the Quahog setting acknowledging what that shift might mean for the people who knew the earlier version of the child. There is also the matter of Cleveland's voice, which changed in the real world due to circumstances entirely outside the narrative. Mike Henry, who had voiced Cleveland since the beginning of the show, stepped away from the role beginning with season 19 in 2020, following a broader conversation in the entertainment industry about the practice of white actors voicing black animated characters. Henry released a public statement acknowledging that the character should be voiced by a black actor and voluntarily stepped aside. Arif Zahir, a comedian and actor who had created popular Cleveland impression videos on YouTube, was cast in the role. The transition was handled smoothly at the production level. Zahir's performance maintained the essential qualities of the character while bringing his own interpretation to it. But within the context of this section's discussion of continuity, it adds one more layer to the question of who Cleveland is and what version of him the audience is watching at any given time. The character has been through a divorce, a cross-country move, a remarriage, a return to his original home, the transformation of his son, and two distinct voices. He is the same character across all of these changes by narrative convention, but the accumulated weight of them makes him one of the most changed figures in the show's run. The spin-off itself is worth a moment. The Cleveland show was not a failure in the way that some people remember it. It ran for 4 seasons. It had its devoted audience. But it never achieved the cultural penetration of Family Guy or American Dad, and its cancellation was ultimately the result of a gradual ratings decline that Fox eventually decided not to try to reverse. Whether the show could have been what Family Guy was if it had been given more time and more investment is an unanswerable question. What is answerable is that its existence, 4 seasons of stories, a full cast of new characters, a complete new setting created obligations that Family Guy then had to honor when Cleveland came back. Not all of those obligations were fully met. The mystery of Cleveland's departure and return is really a mystery about what happens when a fictional universe has to accommodate a parallel fictional universe and then absorb it back. The seams are visible. The continuity doesn't quite line up on all sides. And Cleveland himself, standing on Spooner Street in the post-return seasons, is a character with more history behind him than any single iteration of the show can fully hold. Section 10. The chicken fight origins, an expired coupon, and a feud without end. There is a giant chicken. He is approximately the size of a man. His name is Ernie. He wears no clothes. He does not as a general rule speak, though he is capable of speech when the scene requires it. He exists in the town of Quahog as a regular resident. He has a wife, he has a life, he operates a business, or at least appears to be employed in some capacity, and periodically, across many seasons, he and Peter Griffin find each other in some corner of the town and engage in a fight that destroys enormous amounts of property and injures an unspecified number of bystanders, and is not resolved until one of them is incapacitated, at which point Peter walks away and Ernie quietly recovers and the world resets until the next time they encounter each other. These fights are among the most technically elaborate sequences the show produces. The animation is more complex, the choreography more intricate, the duration more extended than almost anything else in a typical episode. They are cinematic action sequences dropped into the middle of a domestic comedy, and they are simultaneously completely absurd and played with total commitment. Nobody comments on them. Nobody intervenes. The town accommodates them. The question of why these two entities are at war is answered by the show in the episode Da Boom, an expired coupon. Ernie the Giant Chicken gave Peter Griffin a coupon that turned out to have passed its expiration date. Peter reacted to this as though it were a personal attack, and the attack became physical, and the physical confrontation became a pattern that has persisted across more than 2 decades of storytelling. This is, on its face, a perfect joke. The disproportionality between the cause, a minor consumer inconvenience, and the effect, an elaborate, property-destroying, potentially lethal brawl that recurs indefinitely, is the entire comedy. And the show honors that comedy consistently. Each new fight is an escalation of the original absurdity. They fight across entire cities. They fight through buildings and across highways and onto boats and through airports and into space in the later seasons. The terrain changes. The intensity increases. The underlying reason never does. But there is an additional layer of mystery here that the show introduced and then left genuinely unresolved. In the episode Meet the Quagmires, which involves Peter using a time machine to revisit 1984, Peter accidentally punches a young Ernie in the face at a dance called Enchantment Under the Sea. He does this without intending to and without knowing who the chicken is. The episode presents this as the moment that created the feud that young Ernie, struck unexpectedly by Peter, carried that grudge forward for the next 20 years, and it was that accumulated resentment that made the coupon incident the spark rather than the incidental inconvenience it might otherwise have been. This retcon changes the moral structure of the feud in an interesting way. In the original version, Ernie gives Peter a bad coupon, and Peter overreacts violently. Ernie is possibly an innocent party to an escalation he didn't choose. In the Meet the Quagmires version, Peter strikes Ernie first, in the past, and the coupon incident is Ernie's much later response to a wound he has been carrying. The feud was always Peter's fault, not the coupon's. Ernie has been waiting for the right moment. These two versions of the origin cannot both be entirely true at once, and the show never resolved the contradiction. Fans have proposed various theories about which is canonical. One reading holds that both are true, that Peter's 1984 punch planted the seed of Ernie's hostility, and that when the coupon incident occurred years later, Ernie recognized an opportunity to express the aggression he'd been holding and did not let it pass. Another reading holds that the time travel episode represents an alternate timeline in which the cause of the feud is different than it was in the original, and that the Daboom explanation remains primary in the main universe. The mystery of Ernie's nature itself is also worth noting. He is a giant chicken. He is also apparently unkillable, or nearly so. Every fight ends with Peter apparently leaving Ernie dead, and every subsequent fight begins with Ernie having survived whatever apparently killed him. He has been stabbed, hanged, roasted, chopped, submerged, and left in states of injury that the show presents as fatal, and that he then recovers from completely. His regenerative capacity is beyond cartoon convention. Other characters who sustain serious injuries in the show are affected by them in at least the short term. Ernie shows no lasting effects from any of the accumulated damage of their encounters. The show's own DVD commentary has revealed that Seth MacFarlane intended at least one of the chicken fights to be Ernie's final death, but that he was convinced to keep the character alive because the fights had become too beloved a part of the show's identity. The decision to continue the character was commercial rather than narrative. Ernie keeps coming back not because the story demands it, but because the audience enjoys the fights. This is a transparent acknowledgement of the show, using external considerations to override internal fictional logic, which is a kind of fourth-wall observation that the show usually reserves for self-aware jokes rather than production decisions. There is also the matter of Ernie's interior life, which the show almost never explores. He has a wife named Nicole. She has appeared in at least one episode where, after a third fight, the combatants actually reached a temporary peace and Ernie took Peter to dinner with Nicole. The dinner ends the truce. The feud reignites when Peter refuses to let Ernie pay and says something insulting to Nicole, but the fact that it existed at all is significant. Ernie is not just a fighting machine. He has a domestic life. He has affections. He has relationships he is protective of. The moment Peter threatens something Ernie cares about, the détente ends immediately and the violence resumes. This suggests that the feud between Peter and Ernie is not simply the show giving you a long fight scene for its own sake. It is, in some compressed and absurdist way, a statement about what men fight over and why. The original insult is trivial. The real injury is the accumulation of that triviality into a story that both parties have committed to. Neither Peter nor Ernie can easily extract himself from the narrative of their conflict, because the narrative has become part of who they each are in relation to the other. Peter Griffin is the man who fights the giant chicken. Ernie is the giant chicken who fights Peter Griffin. The feud defines them both. And whatever the original cause was, continuing it is now its own reason. Section 11. The multiverse episodes and what they accidentally reveal. In Season 8, Episode 1 of Family Guy, Stewie Griffin explains the multiverse to Brian Griffin while they are standing in a town fairground. He does it the way Stewie explains most things, with precision, with slight condescension, and with the implication that anyone paying attention should have already known this. The theory, Stewie says, holds that there are an infinite number of universes existing simultaneously on parallel dimensional planes. In each of these alternate realities, things are different. Sometimes slightly, sometimes quite radically. The episode that follows Road to the Multiverse is widely considered one of the best episodes of the show's run. It won a Primetime Emmy Award for animation. It drew over 10 million viewers. It is creative and funny and technically inventive in ways that stand apart from most of the series. But what is interesting for our purposes is not what the episode shows you about alternate universes. It is what it accidentally shows you about the main universe by showing you everything the main universe is not. The first alternate universe Stewie and Brian visit is one where Christianity never existed, and therefore the dark ages of scientific repression never occurred, and humanity is roughly 1,000 years more technologically advanced than in the world we know. In this universe, Meg Griffin is, as Brian notes with appreciation, genuinely beautiful. Not cartoon beautiful, recognizably, conventionally attractive in a way that the regular Meg is never allowed to be. The show holds on this detail long enough to make sure you notice it. The regular Meg is only unattractive in the main universe. She is only the target of contempt because of where she exists, not because of what she intrinsically is. Take away the specific cultural context of Quahog, and she becomes someone entirely different. This is the most honest thing the multiverse episode does, and it does it almost in passing. The universe that is more advanced does not produce a worse version of Meg, it produces a better version. The implication is that the regular Meg's undesirability is not about Meg. It is about the specific, constrained, petty world she inhabits. The dog universe, where dogs are the dominant species and humans are their pets, is the episode's most extended section, and it is also the most revealing in terms of what it says about Brian's psychology. In this universe, Brian is happy in a way he is rarely happy in the main universe. He is admired. He is in a socially dominant position. He does not have to justify his intelligence or his tastes or his existence. He belongs here in a way he never quite belongs in Quahog, and he is reluctant to leave. The Brian of the main universe lives with a permanent sense of not quite fitting. He is too smart for the room but not successful enough to be taken seriously. He is a dog in a human world, which is both his literal condition and a metaphor for a kind of social displacement that the show never fully resolves. In the dog universe, the metaphor inverts, and for the first time Brian gets to be the right kind of entity in the right kind of world. The fact that he immediately wants to stay is not played purely for comedy. It is played with a genuine undercurrent of something sad. The Disney Universe section of the episode is technically impressive, the animation shifts to a clean, bright musical Disney style, and the sequence includes an original song. But it also makes an observation about the main universe by contrast. The Disney Universe is optimistic. It is warm. Conflicts resolve through love and understanding. The colors are cleaner, the faces softer, the underlying emotional logic more generous. Everything in the main Family Guy universe is the opposite of this. And when you are watching the Disney version, you feel the distance from the show you were watching 10 minutes ago. The gap between those two aesthetics is a measurement of how far Family Guy has traveled from warmth. The live-action universe section where Stewie and Brian appear as real animals, a human baby and a real white Labrador, is brief but conceptually interesting. In the real universe, they cannot communicate. The baby makes baby noises. The dog makes dog noises. The sophisticated relationship between them, built on language and mutual respect and shared experience, is simply gone. It doesn't exist outside of the fictional space they normally inhabit. The mystery this raises is one the show doesn't address. What is the relationship between the real-world versions of these characters? If they cannot speak, do they still have some version of the connection they have as fictional entities? Or is the friendship entirely a product of the narrative, with no substrate beneath it? The episode ends with human Brian, the Brian from the dog universe, who had taken the place of the regular Brian, stepping into the regular world and immediately being hit by a car. He dies. He had lasted exactly long enough to get through the door before the world killed him. It is played as a dark joke, but it is also, if you choose to read it this way, a meditation on how hostile the main Family Guy universe is to anything that doesn't belong to it. Dog universe Brian, in the wrong world, lasts seconds. He is not equipped for this place. The place destroys him before he can even adjust. The multiverse concept, having been introduced in this episode, recurred in various forms across later seasons. Other versions of the Griffin family appeared. Alternate timelines were visited, but the episode that introduced the concept remains the most tightly argued and most honest of these excursions. And what it argued almost accidentally, almost without meaning to, is that everything terrible about the main Family Guy universe is contingent. It is the product of specific choices made in this specific version of the world. In an infinite multiverse somewhere, Meg is beautiful and Brian is happy, and the Griffins are warm with each other, and the animation is soft, and the sun is always at the right angle. That universe exists. The show just doesn't take place there. Section 12. The timeline collapse. How old is everyone, and when does this show take place? Here is a simple question. How old is Meg Griffin? She is 15 at the start of the series. She is 17 in the episode Peter's Two Dads, which is in Season 5. She turns 18 in the Season 10 episode Meg and Quagmire. She is still, by all appearances, a high school student in Season 23, which aired more than 2 decades after the show began. Meg Griffin is perpetually a teenager. She does not age in any meaningful or consistent sense. She has birthdays that are referenced in episodes, but those birthdays do not accumulate into time. She does not graduate from high school and move into a different phase of her life. She is held in adolescence the way a butterfly is held in amber, preserved exactly as she is, unchanging, for as long as the show runs. This is true of every character in the show to varying degrees. Peter's age has been given as 42 in some episodes and 45 in others, and implied to be older or younger still in various flashbacks. Lois was born on the 3rd of June, 1958, which would make her 66 years old as of 2024. She does not look 66. She does not behave 66. The age on the license and the character in the present have separated entirely. Stewie is 1 year old. He has been 1 year old for more than 25 years of broadcast television. He has had a birthday episode. He has not become 2. The show has never addressed this directly, presumably because addressing it would require the show to either age Stewie into something different, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, eventually a child, or to acknowledge that its own internal time is broken. The writer's approach to this problem is what fans call the floating timeline. It is a device used by many long-running animated series. The Simpsons is the most famous example, but Family Guy adopted it as well. The floating timeline means that the show exists in a perpetual present. Characters reference current events, current cultural moments, current technology. The show updates its references constantly to stay topical. But the characters do not age, and the passage of time does not accumulate in their personal histories the way it would in a realistic narrative. The floating timeline is an acknowledged convention, and most audiences accept it without distress. What makes it more complicated in Family Guy specifically is that the show has, on multiple occasions, seemed to want to break out of the convention and engage with real time. It has done flashbacks to specific historical periods that imply specific characters' ages in those periods. It has had characters reference how long they have known each other in ways that suggest specific spans of time. It has had episodes like the time travel episodes that engage seriously with the implications of cause and effect across different periods. Each time the show does this, it creates a record of what the timeline should be, and those records contradict each other because they were made by different writers at different times for different purposes, without a sustained commitment to maintaining a consistent chronology. Brian's son Dylan is a particularly stark example of this problem. Brian is canonically described as 10 years old, in dog years. Dogs age at approximately 7 times the rate of humans, which would make 10 dog years roughly equivalent to 70 human years. Brian has the lifespan of a dog, which the show has acknowledged. He is visibly aging, or at least this is the implication. He has a 13-year-old son from a previous relationship. A 10-year-old dog who fathered a 13-year-old human child would have to have done so before he himself was born, by any realistic accounting. The math is impossible, and the show simply doesn't try to do the math. Then there is the matter of Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife. Bonnie was pregnant for what fans calculated to be approximately 7 real-world years, before finally giving birth in the show. This is not a case of fictional time moving differently from real-world time. The show was acknowledging the pregnancy in real time, referencing Bonnie's condition in episodes throughout that period, and simply not resolving it until the writers eventually decided to resolve it. The pregnancy existed in a kind of indefinite suspension that acknowledged the floating timeline while also being too specific, too embodied, too narrative to fully float. The most unsettling version of the timeline problem is the question of what happened between the original run of the show, from 1999 to 2002, and the revival that began in 2005. The 3-year gap in the real world corresponded to some period of time in the show's fictional universe, but that period is never accounted for. The characters did not have 3 years of experiences during the gap. They did not age 3 years. They did not, within the fiction, notice that time had passed. The show simply resumed, and the gap between the last episode of Season 3 and the first episode of Season 4 is a blank space in the Griffins' lives that will never be filled. A fan theory holds that this blank space is not accidental. It proposes that the pre-cancellation and post-cancellation shows are not the same show, occupying the same continuous timeline, but rather 2 alternate versions of the same family's story, parallel universe versions, like the ones visited in Road to the Multiverse. In this reading, the Season 4 Griffin family is not the same family as the Season 3 Griffin family. They are analogs, close enough to be mistaken for each other, sharing the same names and the same basic configurations, but fundamentally different entities who have been living different lives in a different version of the same world. This would explain why Peter gradually became crueler and less lovable after the revival. It would explain why Brian became more insufferable. It would explain why the treatment of Meg escalated. The original family in the original universe was the warmer version. The revival family in the slightly different universe had more edges. 2 families, 2 shows, 1 continuous broadcast signal. The evidence for this is mostly circumstantial, of course. The show almost certainly did not intend to create 2 parallel continuities. The change in tone and character was the result of real-world decisions, new writers, new priorities, the influence of YouTube clip culture, the gradual withdrawal of McFarlane from active creative oversight. The fantasy of 2 separate timelines is a way of protecting the first version of the family from responsibility for what the second version became. And yet the theory persists because it is emotionally true even if it is not factually accurate. Something did change. The show did become something different. And the simplest way to honor both the thing it was and the thing it became, while also explaining why neither version has aged a single year across more than a quarter century of broadcast television, is to say, these are not the same Griffins. They just live at the same address. The mysteries of Family Guy are not the kind that get solved. They are the kind that accumulate. Every answer the show provides creates 2 new questions. Every rule it establishes has an exception that appears 3 seasons later and is never acknowledged. Every character who is explained in one episode is contradicted in the next. The show is a machine that generates mystery as a byproduct of existing for as long as it has, with as many writers as it has had, for an audience that is paying more attention than the writers sometimes realized. Stewie can be heard when he can. Lois is whoever the episode needs her to be. Peter is as smart or as dumb as the joke requires. Brian is a man in a dog's body with no origin story anyone is willing to commit to. Quagmire is 61, and also somehow 30. Meg is hated for reasons nobody can fully articulate. Death is real and then reversed. The town is small and also enormous. Cleveland came back from a universe that was almost its own separate continuity. Ernie the Giant Chicken is unkillable and still bearing a grudge over a coupon that may or may not be the real reason any of this started. The multiverse exists, and the main universe is arguably the worst version of itself across all possible realities. The timeline is a fiction within a fiction. None of this is a failure. All of it is the accumulated texture of something that has been alive for a very long time, telling its stories to anyone who will listen, leaving things unresolved, the way real life leaves things unresolved. Not because resolution is impossible, but because the story isn't over yet, and some mysteries are better carried than solved. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, I hope you found something here that was worth staying up a little later for, or that made the night a little softer and a little more interesting as you drifted toward sleep. The mysteries of Spooner Street will still be there tomorrow. They will still be there next week. They have outlasted 2 cancellations and a writer's strike and decades of cultural change, and they show no signs of resolving. That is the real mystery, maybe. The fact that after all this time, people still want to know. If this kept you company tonight, I'd love it if you left a like on your way out, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There is more to come, and I would really love to have you there for it. Sleep well. Section 13. Herbert the Pervert, the old man with the classified past. At 35 Spooner Street, just a few houses down from the Griffins, there lives a very old man. His name is John Herbert. He wears a pale blue bathrobe. He moves slowly, assisted by a Zimmer frame walker. His dog Jesse is elderly and crippled and moves even more slowly than Herbert does. His voice is soft and high and has a faint whistling quality to it, a slight lisp that makes him sound almost gentle from a distance. He calls out to the neighborhood kids with a warmth that sounds, for a brief moment, like the warmth of any elderly neighbor who remembers what it was like to be young. He is 92 years old. Herbert first appeared in Season 3, in the episode called To Love and Die in Dixie, when Chris Griffin takes up a paper route and begins delivering to his house. It is in that episode that the audience understands what kind of character this is and what his interest in Chris represents. The show plays this as comedy, dark comedy, transgressive comedy, the kind of comedy that relies on the audience understanding the wrongness of what it is depicting and laughing at the gap between Herbert's soft-spoken demeanor and the nature of his intentions. But set aside the comedy for a moment and look at the biographical record, because Herbert has one, and it is considerably more interesting than you might expect from a character who was initially conceived as a single-episode recurring gag. Herbert is a veteran of the Second World War. This is established in the Season 6 episode Padre de Familia, when he appears at a Veterans Day celebration in the park in his formal military dress uniform, singing God Bless the USA with a sincerity that the show plays entirely straight. He is not a joke in that scene. He is an old soldier honoring a tradition, wearing decorations that represent actual service in an actual conflict that defined the 20th century. The show wants you to see both things simultaneously: the Herbert who is a comedy figure in his bathrobe, and the Herbert who served his country in a war that ended before most of the audience was born. The full backstory of Herbert's wartime service is revealed in the Season 9 episode German Guy. In this episode, Herbert discovers that a man named Franz Schlecknacht has moved to Quahog and is now making a living selling puppets. He recognizes Franz as someone from his past, specifically as someone who was part of the Nazi military operation that captured Herbert during the war. Herbert had served in the Army Air Corps, one of the predecessor organizations to the modern United States Air Force. He was shot down or captured during the European theater, and rather than being sent to a standard prisoner of war camp, he was sent to Dachau concentration camp. The reason for this unusual treatment was that the Nazi forces, upon searching Herbert, found photographs of young boys among his possessions and concluded, based on their own prejudices, that he was gay. In the ideology that structured Nazi Germany's camp system, that was sufficient grounds to send him to a concentration camp rather than a conventional military prison. Herbert survived Dachau. He was liberated, at some point, as the camp was liberated by Allied forces in April of 1945. He came home, he lived his life. He is now 92 years old and living at 35 Spooner Street, and his antagonist from that concentration camp is now in the same town. The episode where this backstory is revealed is one of the stranger entries in the show's catalog, because it asks you to hold something very uncomfortable at the same time. Herbert's history includes real suffering. He was persecuted by an actual genocidal regime. He survived something that killed enormous numbers of people. And Herbert, in the present, is himself guilty of a form of predatory behavior toward children. The show does not resolve this tension. It does not draw a moral lesson from it. It presents both facts and lets the audience sit with the contradiction. What the backstory does is make Herbert human in a way that the surface character design does not. It gives him a history, a wound, a specific historical context for being the person he became. Whether the show intends any causal connection between the trauma of his wartime experience and his present-day behavior is left ambiguous. The implication is present but not stated. The show is not interested in building a psychological case for Herbert. It is interested in the comedic potential of his character, with the backstory functioning as a kind of dark footnote that makes him three-dimensional without rehabilitating him. The mystery of Herbert is the mystery of duration itself. How has this person existed in the town of Quahog for all of these years, in plain sight, without official consequence? The show has never provided a satisfying answer. He is a recurring figure in the neighborhood. Peter knows him. The Griffins know him. The town seems to accommodate him with the same resigned acceptance it extends to all of its more unusual residents. The show once had Peter and Lois hire Herbert to babysit their children in an episode, which is either the darkest joke the show has ever made or a piece of evidence that the adults of Quahog are simply not paying enough attention to what is going on in their neighborhood. Herbert also holds a position in the Skull and Bones secret society, according to information dropped in one episode. This is the real-world secret society associated with Yale University, which has functioned in American popular culture as a symbol of elite power and hidden influence. What Herbert's membership means for the world of the show, whether it is a one-off joke or a genuine piece of lore suggesting Herbert has connections and protections that extend into actual power structures, is never elaborated on. It is one more piece of Herbert's unexplained life that sits in the show's accumulated mythology without resolution. He is 92 years old, and he has survived a world war and a concentration camp and 9 decades of American life. And he is still on Spooner Street, still moving slowly behind his walker, still calling to the neighborhood kids in that soft, whistling voice. Family Guy has never fully explained why he is what he is. It has never tried to. He simply exists as one more piece of the unresolved world that lines the streets of Quahog like furniture that was there when you moved in and that nobody has ever thought to question. Section 14. The Big Bang Theory episode. Stewie Griffin created the universe. There is an episode of Family Guy in which it is established, within the show's fictional universe, that Stewie Griffin is responsible for the Big Bang. That the entire universe, not just Rhode Island, not just the Earth, but the entire known and possibly unknown cosmos exists because of something Stewie did. This is presented in a single episode and then essentially not discussed again, which may be the most extraordinary piece of narrative underplaying in the show's history. The episode is called The Big Bang Theory, which aired in Season 9. The plot involves Stewie's half-brother Bertram, a character who had appeared earlier in the series and who shares Stewie's genetic material because of Peter's sperm donations. Bertram was conceived from those donations, making him a kind of fraternal rival. Bertram, in this episode, uses Stewie's time machine to travel back to the Renaissance and attempt to kill Leonardo da Vinci. His reason is that Stewie is descended from da Vinci, and killing the ancestor will erase Stewie from existence. Stewie and Brian pursue Bertram through time. They manage to prevent Bertram from killing da Vinci directly, but in the process, the return pad from Stewie's time machine is detonated outside of the established space-time continuum. The explosion is enormous. Stewie and Brian are thrown back into the present timeline. Once they are back, Stewie compares the energy signature of the return pad's explosion with scientific measurements of the Big Bang's cosmic background radiation. The signatures match. The explosion that sent them back to the present is the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the return pad. The universe did not exist before Stewie and Brian's adventure outside of space and time created the conditions for it to exist. The show draws the logical conclusion from this. Stewie is in a temporal causality loop. The universe created Stewie, so Stewie could create the universe, so the universe could create Stewie. He is both the product of the universe and its cause. The loop has no beginning and no end. It is self-sustaining and self-referential, and it makes Stewie Griffin, in some meaningful sense, the most important entity in the history of existence. The show then moves on to the next episode and never brings this up again. What makes this genuinely mysterious is not the science fiction logic, which is internally coherent within the show's own rules. What makes it mysterious is what it means for everything else in the series. If Stewie created the universe, then every moment of every episode of Family Guy, every joke, every cutaway gag, every fight between Peter and a giant chicken, every moment of suffering Meg has endured. All of it exists because of a chain of causation that begins with Stewie's time travel and the detonation of a return pad outside the space-time continuum. The Griffin family exists because the universe exists. The universe exists because Stewie traveled through time. Stewie traveled through time because he was born into the Griffin family. And he was born into the Griffin family because the universe exists. This is, in a strange way, the show telling you that everything is exactly as it had to be. Every absurdity, every cruelty, every moment of grace scattered across more than 20 seasons, all of it is structurally necessary to the existence of the cosmos. Meg suffered because the universe required her to. Brian became what he became because the universe required it. The expired coupon that started the chicken fight exists because Stewie's return pad exploded at the beginning of time. The show does not linger on this. It cannot linger on it, because the comedy depends on the audience not thinking about it too hard during any given episode. But once you have seen the Big Bang Theory episode, the cosmological frame is there. Stewie is not just a baby in a yellow shirt. He is the reason anything exists at all. And he is still in his high chair, eating strained peas, planning things that nobody around him takes seriously. There is also the matter of Stewie's announced spin-off series, called simply Stewie, which Fox ordered in 2025. In that series, Stewie is expelled from his preschool and forced to attend a new one, where he uses his time machine and other inventions to turn ordinary school days into surreal adventures. This means the fictional universe is preparing to tell more stories about the entity that accidentally created the Big Bang, and those stories will be set in a preschool, which is perhaps the funniest possible scale at which to tell them. The mystery of Stewie Griffin, compounding across all of these layers: the comprehension mystery, the evil genius mystery, the cosmological mystery, the question of what he will become as the show eventually allows him to age into a new format, is the show's richest and most unresolved narrative thread. He is everything, and he is 1 year old. He is the reason the universe exists, and he cannot consistently use a toilet. These contradictions are the character, and the character is, somehow, still going. Section 15. The Joe Swanson Mystery. A hero's gradual diminishment. Joe Swanson arrived on Spooner Street in Season 1, in the episode A Hero Sits Next Door, and he arrived as something Peter had never encountered before in a neighbor, someone everyone admired immediately, without reservation. Joe was a police officer who had been paralyzed from the waist down in the line of duty. He used a wheelchair. He had the kind of natural authority and physical capability and easy confidence that made people like him without him having to try. Peter, who is constitutionally incapable of not being the center of attention, was immediately and intensely jealous of the new neighbor. The joke of the episode is that Joe is simply better at everything than Peter. He is more capable, he is more respected, he is a more impressive physical specimen. Disability notwithstanding, people want to be around Joe. They want his approval. They find him inspiring. Peter, confronted with someone who outshines him without effort, initially resents Joe and then, through the events of the episode, comes to befriend him genuinely. That friendship is one of the foundational relationships of the show's ensemble. Peter, Joe, Cleveland, and Quagmire form the core friend group that spends time at the Drunken Clam and gets into various situations together. Joe's presence in that group was established as a contrast where Peter is impulsive, Joe is deliberate. Where Peter is self-centered, Joe has professional obligations that extend into the community. He is a police officer in the town where the show takes place, which means he should theoretically be both a source of order and a complication for some of Peter's more flagrant lawbreaking. The mystery of Joe Swanson is what happened to the character that arrived in that first season, because the Joe of the later seasons is a very different person from the Joe who sat in that lawn chair in Season 1 and made Peter feel inadequate just by existing. Across the show's run, Joe's arc follows a specific trajectory. He starts as the most capable and respected member of the friend group. He ends, at least by the middle seasons, as the most frequently mocked and most consistently diminished one. His wheelchair, which in Season 1 was handled with a certain seriousness alongside the comedy, became in later seasons a source of increasingly mean-spirited jokes. His wife Bonnie's disaffection with their marriage became a running subplot that positioned Joe as someone whose partner had stopped respecting him. His police capabilities, which in early episodes were referenced as genuine and impressive, were largely forgotten in later seasons as Joe became a character defined primarily by his limitations rather than his abilities. The show addressed the question of Joe's injury history in a handful of episodes that tried to lock down how he was paralyzed, with varying success. One episode suggested his injury occurred when he fell from a roof while chasing a criminal. Another offered a different account. The show was not consistent about the specific circumstances, which means the backstory of how he became the person he is remains slightly blurry around the edges. His relationship with his wife Bonnie is its own contained mystery. Bonnie was pregnant for what felt like the entirety of the first decade of the show. She eventually gave birth to their daughter Susie. Their son Kevin, who had been established as an older child, was later introduced as having died in action in Iraq. A genuinely somber piece of storytelling for a show that usually doesn't sit with serious losses. And then Kevin appeared alive in a later episode without any clear explanation for his return. The show handled this with its usual confidence in the audience's willingness to accept discontinuity, but the result is that Kevin Swanson occupies a peculiar position in the show's mythology. He is both dead and alive, depending on which episode you watch. There is also the matter of Peter's friendship with Joe and what it actually means in practice. In the early seasons, the four friends Peter, Joe, Quagmire, Cleveland had a genuine and balanced camaraderie. Each person contributed something to the dynamic. Joe's capability was a resource. His moral authority was a counterweight. His patience was a brake on Peter's worst impulses. As the seasons progressed, Peter's behavior toward all three of his friends became more erratic and more casually harmful, but his behavior toward Joe specifically tracked a particular kind of diminishment that mirrored what the show was doing to Joe's character overall. The man Peter once envied became the man Peter no longer bothered to envy because the gap between them had closed in the worst possible direction. The Joe Swanson mystery is not about a single unanswered question. It is about a character who had a complete and compelling identity at the start of the show and gradually had that identity eroded, season by season, until what remained was more outline than substance. He is still on the street, he still shows up at the bar, he still has his police badge and his wheelchair and his booming voice. But the presence that made Peter jealous in Season 1 is harder to find in the later years. Something left and the show never explicitly noted its departure. Section 16. The Rupert Mystery. What does Stewie's teddy bear know? This section is going to take a slightly different angle, because Rupert is a teddy bear. He cannot speak, he cannot move. He is, by every observable standard, an inanimate object. And yet within the logic of the show, Stewie's relationship with Rupert is treated as a genuine, meaningful, emotionally weighted bond that the show has returned to repeatedly across its run as a source of both comedy and genuine pathos. Rupert first appears as simply Stewie's constant companion, the teddy bear that the baby carries around, that sits in his crib, that is present in the background of most of his scenes. In the early seasons, Rupert's presence is simply part of Stewie's visual identity. He is the teddy bear of an evil genius. That is funny. That is enough. But across the seasons, the show develops something more specific between Stewie and Rupert. Stewie talks to Rupert, not the way a child talks to a stuffed animal in a general sense, but in a sustained, ongoing way that implies he receives something in return, something invisible to the audience, but present in Stewie's responses. Stewie has emotions about Rupert that are clearly real within the show's emotional register. He has expressed jealousy when Rupert seemed to pay attention to others. He has expressed grief when Rupert was damaged or lost. He has expressed the kind of possessiveness that comes from a relationship that genuinely matters. In the later seasons, the show put Rupert at the center of a conflict between Stewie and Brian. Brian, in a drunken episode, destroyed Rupert, chewed the bear to pieces because he was frustrated with Stewie's habit of treating Rupert as a real companion. This was presented as one of Brian's more genuinely terrible moments, and Stewie's response to Rupert's destruction was one of the more authentic expressions of grief the character has had in the later seasons. The question the show never answers is what Rupert represents in the psychological architecture of Stewie Griffin. For a character who has always had an ambiguous relationship with actual connection, who was in the early seasons defined by the desire to destroy his mother, and who in the later seasons formed his most meaningful bond with Brian, Rupert functions as a kind of first attachment object. In the psychological sense, the first thing Stewie chose to love, the first relationship he had complete control over, because Rupert could not leave, could not disagree, could not be disappointed. In the episode Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, a direct-to-DVD movie that showed a flash-forward to Stewie at age 35, the adult Stewie is shown as having maintained a relationship with Rupert across the intervening decades. The bear is present. It matters to him still. Whatever the arc of Stewie's life has been, in this imagined future, his connection to Rupert is one of the things that persisted. This flash-forward raises its own questions about the show's timeline. If Stewie eventually grows up, what does that mean for the Stewie who is 1 year old in the present episodes? The show has used the time machine to explore future versions of Stewie in ways that don't commit to any single canonical future. Each flash-forward or time travel episode to Stewie's future presents a somewhat different version of who he becomes. In one future, he is a wealthy and emotionally complicated adult. In another, he is someone different entirely. The futures are provisional. The present is what the show commits to. And in the present, Rupert is in the crib. Silent. Patient. The repository of whatever Stewie cannot say out loud to anyone who could talk back. Section 17. The Bonnie Swanson Pregnancy, a Study in Fictional Time. Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, was visibly pregnant when she was introduced into the show. This was in the late Season 1 or early Season 2 timeframe. The precise introduction is a matter of some debate among fans who track these things carefully. What is not a matter of debate is that she remained visibly, explicitly pregnant for approximately 7 to 8 seasons of broadcast television. In real-world time, that represents roughly 7 years. From approximately 2000 to 2007, Bonnie Swanson was pregnant. She gave birth to Susie in Season 7, in the episode Ocean's 3.5, and the event was treated as a kind of narrative release, a long-running implicit joke about the floating timeline finally being resolved through actual plot. But the resolution of Bonnie's pregnancy did not resolve the questions it had created. 7 seasons of pregnancy, in a show that occasionally acts like time is passing, implies that either fictional time moves at a drastically different rate than real time for this character specifically, or that the show simply declined to address the pregnancy as a narrative matter and then eventually felt obligated to do something about it. The second explanation is almost certainly the correct one. Bonnie's pregnancy was initially established as a character detail and then allowed to persist because addressing it would require the show to either have her give birth, which creates new storytelling obligations around a baby, or have some other narrative event occur. The floating timeline made it easy to simply leave her pregnant indefinitely. When the writers finally decided to close the loop, they did so and moved forward. But the fan question this raises has never been cleanly answered. Within the fictional timeline of the show, how long was Bonnie pregnant? If the characters are not aging, if Peter is not appreciably older in Season 7 than he was in Season 1, then the pregnancy presumably has not lasted 7 years of fictional time either. It has lasted some shorter, unspecified period. The show has simply never said how long. The pregnancy is resolved without specifying its duration, which is consistent with how the show handles most things that require temporal honesty. The deeper Bonnie mystery is what happens to her character after the pregnancy ends. Bonnie in the early seasons is mostly a background figure present at neighborhood events, occasionally part of the social fabric of the show. After Susie's birth and across the middle and later seasons, she becomes somewhat more active, but she is also the vehicle for storylines about her dissatisfaction with Joe, her attraction to other men, and eventually an arc where she has an affair which the show handles with its characteristic combination of comedy and genuine domestic consequence. What the Bonnie storylines suggest, across the show's run, is that the show had limited interest in developing her as a full character and used her primarily as a mechanism for Joe-related plots. She is defined largely by her relationship to Joe rather than by her own interior life. In this way, her trajectory mirrors several other female characters in the show who function as satellites around their male partners rather than as gravitational centers of their own. The pregnancy is the most visible symbol of this, an enormous physical change that the show carried for years without ever making it central to a sustained storyline. It was there, taking up space on screen, meaning something in the visual register of the show. And then it ended. And Bonnie moved forward into the next chapters of her life in Quahog, and the show moved forward with her, and the 7-year pregnancy became just another entry in the long list of things Family Guy did that it never fully explained. Section 18. The Pawtucket Patriot and Peter's professional life. What does he actually do? Peter Griffin's employment history is one of the show's most reliably inconsistent threads, but it is also, if you look at it carefully, one of the most telling windows into how the show thinks about working-class life and the kind of economic reality its main character is supposed to represent. In the early seasons, Peter works at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. He is a safety inspector, which is presented as an ironic job title given that Peter is himself a safety hazard in most situations. He is fired from this job in Season 2 and then rehired, and then leaves. The specific circumstances depend on which episode you consult. The toy factory is eventually replaced, as Peter's primary place of employment, by the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, where he works as a shipping clerk. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is the source of the Pawtucket Patriot Ale that Peter and his friends drink at the Drunken Clam. This means Peter works at the factory that produces the beer he drinks, which is a genuinely funny structural detail that the show mostly treats as background texture rather than foregrounding as a joke. He has access, presumably, to the thing he loves most through the nature of his employment. But across the series, Peter has had a staggering number of other jobs that appear for the duration of a single episode and then evaporate. He has been a fisherman. He has been a documentary filmmaker. He has been a mascot. He has been a magazine editor. He has been a comedian. He has been a rock musician. He has briefly and improbably been a professional athlete. Each of these jobs appears as the premise of a single episode, generates its comedy, and then disappears without comment in subsequent episodes, at which point Peter is back at the brewery or simply not at work at all. The show's approach to Peter's employment is the floating timeline applied to professional identity. His job is whatever the episode needs it to be. The brewery is the default, the place he returns to between adventures, and the adventures are the one-episode detours that define the comedy of any given week. What makes this interesting from a mystery perspective is what it implies about the economic reality of the Griffin household. The show has, at various points, addressed money in ways that suggest the Griffins are solidly working class with limited savings and recurring financial stress. The house is nice for Rhode Island, but not extravagant. Lois does not work a paying job for most of the series' run. Peter's brewery salary would have to support 3 children, a family home, and a fairly consistent bar tab. And yet the Griffins also take vacations, purchase boats, make substantial purchases, and generally live a life whose financial demands exceed what a shipping clerk's salary at a regional brewery could realistically cover. This is, again, the floating timeline applied to economics. The show needs the Griffins to be able to do whatever the episode requires them to do, and their finances adjust to meet that need. The mystery is not that Peter's job is inconsistent. The mystery is what the show thinks working-class life means. The original premise, a man working in a toy factory, trying to provide for his family, running up against his own limitations, has a specific emotional register that connects to a real social experience. Peter was, in the early seasons, a working man. Not glamorous, not aspirational, but real in the way that sitcom working men have been real since the genre began. As the show's ambitions and its need for episode premises expanded, that specificity faded, and Peter became a character who works vaguely somewhere and whose job can change when the story requires it. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is still there. Peter still goes to work. But the work has become scenery rather than substance, and the man who worked there has become something much larger and more chaotic than a shipping clerk, while still technically being one. That gap between who Peter is on paper and who he actually is on screen is one of the most quietly mysterious things about the show's construction of its main character. Section 9:18. What is the Drunken Clam, and why does it matter? The Drunken Clam is a bar. It is located somewhere in Quahog, at a distance from Spooner Street that varies depending on the episode, in a neighborhood whose specific geography is never quite consistent. It has a wooden sign, it has a pool table, it has bar stools, it has Horace, the bartender who has been there for most of the show's run, and whose last name and full biography are mostly unknown. This is where Peter Griffin and his friends go when they want to be themselves without consequence. This is where the friend group exists in its most natural state. 4 people at a table, with drinks, talking about whatever is happening in their lives. The bar is not spectacular. It is not a set piece. It is simply the place where the social center of the show's male friendships is located. And yet the Drunken Clam is, in some ways, the most important location in the show. Not the Griffin house, which is where the family drama plays out. The bar is where Peter is understood, where his friends accept him without reservation, even when he has just done something that has made all of their lives worse. Where Cleveland used to be, where Quagmire still is, where Joe wheels in and parks his chair at the end of the table and orders a beer. Where the show's male companionship lives. The mystery of the Drunken Clam is a small mystery, but it is one worth naming. What keeps this place open? The clientele is limited. The location appears to be in a neighborhood that does not generate enormous foot traffic. Horace has been behind that bar for decades, serving the same group of regulars who cause various kinds of destruction in and around the establishment. The bar has been damaged, robbed, caught fire, and subjected to Peter-related incidents on multiple occasions. It persists. Horace himself is a ghost figure present in every scene at the bar, functional as a bartender character, but almost entirely without elaborated backstory. He knows his regulars. He pours their drinks. He occasionally makes a comment. He has been given slightly more characterization in certain later episodes, but for most of the show's run he exists as furniture rather than character, which makes him, paradoxically, one of the more mysterious figures in the show, the person who has been present for everything, who has seen every conversation in that bar, who knows what everyone drinks and in what quantities, and who has never been given a full account of his own life. The bar is the show's emotional center for a specific kind of story. The stories about friendship and male companionship, and the particular combination of loyalty and blindness that keeps these four men connected. The conversations at the bar are often the show's most human moments. Things get said there that don't get said anywhere else. The bar is where Brian first admitted to Stewie the things he was afraid of in a different episode. It is where plans are made and where mistakes are processed. It is where the show reminds you, between the chaos, that these characters actually like each other. That is the real mystery of The Drunken Clam. Not its finances or its bartender's hidden depths. The mystery is why a comedy about a chaotic family keeps returning to this small bar as the most reliable source of genuine warmth. And why that warmth survives, episode after episode, in a place where the lighting is not great, and the drinks are probably not remarkable, and the clientele includes a man who regularly destroys large portions of the surrounding town. The answer is probably that the show understands, at some level, that friendship is one of the few things it can actually be sincere about. Everything else, the family dynamics, the character arcs, the continuity is under constant pressure from the demands of comedy. But the friendship in that bar endures. Even when the friends behave terribly, even when the continuity doesn't hold, even when the geography changes, the bar is still there, the friends are still at the table. And that in a show full of mysteries might be the one thing that isn't mysterious at all. Section 20. The show within a show. What is Family Guy? Really? This is the section where the mysteries go deepest and the ground gets most uncertain, because this is the section where the show itself has, on multiple occasions, suggested that what you are watching is not simply a fictional family in a fictional Rhode Island town. It is something more self-conscious than that. The episode Inside Family Guy, from season 15, establishes within the show's fictional universe that Family Guy is itself a television show, that the characters are aware they are on a TV program, that their lives are scripted, that the events of each episode are produced for an audience. This kind of metafictional move is not unique to Family Guy. The Simpsons has done it. South Park has built entire episodes around it. Breaking the fourth wall is a standard comic device. But the specific way Family Guy does it raises questions that the show never resolves. If the characters know they are on a television show, then what are they when the cameras are not on them? Do they exist between episodes? Do they have inner lives that the audience cannot see? Is the quahog that appears on screen the same quahog that exists when no one is watching? Or is it a set that only assembles itself when the narrative requires it? The show has also played with the metafictional layer in the episode Back to the Pilot, in which Brian and Stewie travel back in time to the first episode of Family Guy, literally, the pilot episode that aired in 1999, and interact with the characters as they existed at that moment. This is treated partly as comedy and partly as a genuine opportunity to observe how much has changed since the beginning. But it also raises a question about the nature of the fictional space. If traveling through Stewie's time machine can take you to events that correspond to specific episodes of the show, then the internal timeline of the show's production is also the internal timeline of the fictional universe. This suggests that the fictional characters experience time in the same sequence that the audience receives the episodes. They are not living continuous lives off-screen between broadcasts. They exist when the show runs, and their experiences are the episodes, and the episodes are ordered by air date. The floating timeline is not just a narrative convention. It may be the actual structure of existence in this fictional world. The Big Bang Theory episode adds another layer to this. If Stewie caused the Big Bang, and if the characters exist within the universe the Big Bang created, then the show is about entities whose existence depends on something one of them did. The universe that contains the Griffins is a universe that a Griffin created. It is self-referential in a way that most fiction is not. And then there is the oldest and most persistent meta-reading of Family Guy. The one that holds it is being told by Brian Griffin, who is writing the show as his novel. In this reading, everything, the exaggerated characters, the impossible events, the cruelty toward Meg, the warmth of the bar scenes, is the product of a dog trying to make sense of his own life through fiction. He is the unreliable narrator of his own existence. The show is his book, and the book is always going to be more about him than he is willing to admit. None of these readings are mutually exclusive. The show can be Brian's novel, and a metafictional construction, and a universe Stewie accidentally created, and a floating timeline that adjusts itself for comedy all at the same time. The contradictions do not resolve each other. They accumulate. They layer. They make the show something more complicated and more interesting than a simple animated sitcom, even as the show itself often insists that it is exactly that simple. The mystery of what Family Guy is as a fictional object, as a narrative construction, as a thing that exists in the imaginations of its characters and in the television sets of its audience, is the mystery that contains all the other mysteries. Who can hear Stewie? It depends on what the show is. Is Brian human? It depends on what the show is. Can anyone actually die? It depends on what the show is. Does the town have consistent geography? It depends on what the show is. The answer changes based on what reading you bring to it, and the show has never committed to a single reading, which is either a failure of intention or the most sophisticated thing it has ever done. Probably it is both, done by different people in different episodes for different reasons, accumulated over decades into something that cannot be taken apart cleanly because it was never assembled cleanly to begin with. Family Guy is a mystery that watches itself being a mystery. And after more than 25 years and dozens of unanswered questions and millions of viewers in rooms all over the world who are settling in right now, in whatever time zone they occupy, in whatever hour of the night or early morning finds them after all of that, the show is still going. Still building questions it does not intend to answer. Still finding reasons to return to Spooner Street, to the bar, to the kitchen where a baby is planning something he cannot tell anyone about except the dog, who is the only one who truly listens. The questions you carry out of this video are the same questions you carried in. That is the nature of the mysteries we have been walking through tonight. They are not puzzles with solutions waiting to be found. They are openings, places where the show decided not to close a door, either because it didn't know what was behind it or because it understood that the open door was more valuable than anything a closed one could reveal. Stewie will keep talking, and sometimes people will hear him. Lois will keep carrying her secrets, and sometimes the show will let one slip. Brian will keep being whatever he is, human in a dog's body, or dog with a human's interior, or something else entirely that doesn't map cleanly onto either. Peter will keep doing damage and occasionally, just occasionally, understanding why it matters. Meg will keep trying, in the background of every episode, to be loved the way she deserves. Joe will sit at the table and be the best version of himself that the current episode allows. Quagmire will be 61 years old and also somehow 32. The chicken will recover from whatever happened to it last time and wait for the next encounter. And somewhere on the timeline, in a version of the universe that Stewie's return pad created by accident, all of this is still being recorded. All of this is still running. All of this still matters to someone, somewhere, watching in the dark. If you made it this far tonight, truly, thank you. That means a lot. Drop a like if any of this kept you company. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you are right now and what time it is. I genuinely love seeing those, and if you are not subscribed yet, please do. There is so much more to come, and I would love to have you there for every bit of it. Sleep well. Cahog will still be there in the morning. End of script. Extended notes. Going deeper into the mysteries. On Stewie's British accent, where did it come from? One of the first questions a new viewer asks when watching Family Guy for the first time is, why does the baby have a British accent? Not just a vaguely elevated or theatrical way of speaking, but a specific, refined, upper-class British accent that implies schools, institutions, generations of careful diction. Seth MacFarlane, who voices Stewie, has described the character's voice as being inspired by the actor Rex Harrison, saying he wanted to create an evil version of that particular kind of measured, patrician English delivery. Rex Harrison, famous for roles like Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, that specific combination of intelligence and arrogance and musical precision is the template for how Stewie sounds. But the in-universe question is different from the production question. Within the world of the show, why does a 1-year-old baby in a Rhode Island household sound like he was educated at Eton? His mother Lois has a distinctly American accent. His father Peter has the accent of a working-class man from the northeast of the United States. His brother Chris has an accent. His sister Meg has an accent. Brian, who was picked up as a stray in Rhode Island, speaks with a neutral American accent. And Stewie speaks like he was raised somewhere entirely different from where he actually lives. The show never explains this. It is one of those details that is simply presented as given, as part of the character's identity. Without being grounded in any logic, the show chooses to share with the audience. Fan theories have speculated about past lives, about psychic connections to another identity, about in utero experiences with media from a previous generation. None of these have any canonical support. What the accent does, dramatically and comedically, is establish Stewie as categorically separate from his environment. It marks him as something that does not belong in a Rhode Island living room. The accent is the auditory equivalent of his misaligned scale, the baby-sized body housing an adult scale and beyond adult scale intelligence and ambition. Everything about Stewie is a collision between what he looks like and what he is. The accent is just the most immediately apparent version of that collision. In the later seasons, as Stewie's character shifted away from the evil genius persona and toward a more emotionally available, friendship-focused version of himself, his accent became less consistently aristocratic and slightly more flexible in its register. He can be vulnerable in a way that the original British villain voice would have prevented. He can be sad in a way that carries real weight. The accent softened along with the character, which is either a sign of growth or a sign that the show gradually adjusted the tool to fit the new function. But in the early seasons, when Stewie was most fully realized as the character McFarlane originally conceived, the accent was a constant. It never wavered, it never slipped. A 1-year-old baby in a suburban kitchen, eating strained peas, sounding exactly like someone who had spent decades in the most rarefied rooms in England. That impossibility is the character. And the show never explained it because explaining it would make it smaller. Some things are funnier as unexplained gifts than as answered questions. On the Griffin House, 31 Spooner Street, and what lives inside its walls. The house at 31 Spooner Street is a consistent physical anchor in a show that is mostly not consistent about physical spaces. It is a white 2-story house. It has a specific floor plan that is referenced often enough to be somewhat canonical. The kitchen, the living room, the staircase, the bedrooms upstairs, Stewie's room with its arsenal of impossible inventions, the backyard where Peter has done various things he probably shouldn't have done. The house is modest by the standards of what the Pewterschmidt family wealth might have provided. It is a working-class home in a working-class neighborhood, and it grounds the show's central family in a specific social reality even when everything else about the show is flying free of realistic constraint. The house says, "These people are not wealthy. These people come home to the same rooms every night. These people have a life of specific, recognizable domestic dimensions." And yet the interior of the house is, like so many things in the show, slightly elastic. Rooms appear that were not previously referenced. The layout shifts slightly from episode to episode. The attic, the basement, and the walls of various rooms have been revealed to contain things, equipment, spaces, secrets that would not fit in the physical square footage implied by the exterior. Stewie's room, in particular, is a spatial mystery. The room of a 1-year-old boy in a 2-story house in Rhode Island should be a relatively small space containing a crib, perhaps a changing table, possibly a bookshelf or storage for toys. What Stewie's room actually contains, across the series, includes but is not limited to a fully equipped laboratory with advanced fabrication tools, multiple weapon systems including ray guns, laser cannons, and projectile devices. A time machine of increasing sophistication across different seasons. Mind control equipment, weather control devices, a shrinking pod, a teleportation array, and Rupert, sitting in the crib with the patience of an object that has seen too much and said nothing. Where is all of this? In a child's bedroom? The show operates by the visual logic of the gag, not the spatial logic of architecture. When Stewie needs a piece of equipment, it is there. When it is not needed, it is not referenced. The room is as large as the episode requires it to be. But there is something quietly wonderful about this, if you choose to read it charitably. Stewie's room is described by the show as exactly what it is: the interior of a very strange child's mind made visible. The inventions are not plausibly stored in a bedroom. They are stored in Stewie's imagination, in his sense of himself as an engineer and a villain. The room is a representation of interiority rather than a realistic physical space. In a show that is often too committed to the surface of its comedy to be this sophisticated, this reading of the bedroom as a metaphysical space rather than a literal one is perhaps more generous than the show deserves. But it fits. The house at 31 Spooner Street is the container for all of the Griffin family's mysteries. It holds the contradictions of Lois's hidden past, alongside Peter's questionable cognition, alongside Stewie's impossible bedroom, alongside Meg's decade of suffering, alongside Chris's cheerful obliviousness, alongside Brian's existential displacement. Every mystery in this video takes place, at least partly, within those walls. And the house stands there, episode after episode, white and modest and slightly wrong in its floor plan, and it never gives anything away. On the death of Diane Simmons, the murder mystery that stayed resolved. The episode And Then There Were Fewer aired in Season 9 and was marketed as a special event. It was longer than a typical episode, mystery thriller in its structure, inspired by Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. The characters were gathered for a dinner party at a mansion owned by James Woods, and one by one, people began dying. The revelation was that Diane Simmons, the longtime co-anchor of the local news who had been a recurring character since early in the show's run, was the killer. She had been murdering the guests in an attempt to protect her own secrets. She was herself killed by Stewie in the episode's climax. What makes this death notable in the context of this section is that it stayed. Unlike Brian, Diane Simmons did not come back. She was killed in And Then There Were Fewer, and she has not reappeared as a living character in any subsequent episode. Her absence from the show after Season 9 is simply her absence. The show continued without her. This reveals something about the internal hierarchy of resurrection. Characters who are central to the emotional structure of the show are more likely to return from death because their absence creates a problem the show needs to solve. Characters who are recurring but not core can be killed, and the show adjusts around their absence. The fact that Brian was brought back within 2 episodes of his death while Diane Simmons remains dead 20-plus seasons later is not a plot decision. It is an economics of effect decision. Brian's death generated enormous fan response. Diane Simmons' death was a plot device in a mystery special. The mystery worth noting here is what And Then There Were Fewer revealed about the show's capacity for sustained dramatic storytelling. This was an episode that committed to a mystery structure with genuine care. It had suspects, red herrings, a twist, a climax. It was constructed with more internal consistency and narrative craft than most episodes of its era. And then it became its own island, a special event that the show never quite tried to replicate at the same level of commitment. The possibility that Family Guy could always do this, could always make a mystery work, could always sustain a dramatic structure for a full episode, could always commit to consequences that stay was demonstrated by And Then There Were Fewer, and then mostly set aside. The show returned to its usual patterns. The mystery special became a reference point for what the show could do when it chose to. Diane Simmons stayed dead. That choice, almost uniquely in the show's history, remained uncomplicated by the show's usual preference for reversibility. Something was resolved cleanly and completely, and the show moved forward. In a mystery about a show full of unresolved mysteries, that is itself worth remarking on. On Bonnie Swanson's pregnancy and the question of what the characters experience off-screen, earlier in this script, we talked about Bonnie's 7-year pregnancy as a product of the floating timeline. But there is a deeper question underneath the timeline question, which is what the characters of Family Guy experience during the time between episodes. In realistic fiction, characters exist continuously. They have off-screen lives that inform the lives we see on screen. A character who has not been shown eating for several episodes is presumably eating between those episodes. A character who has not been shown working is presumably working, or has a reason why they are not. The invisible continuity of their lives is assumed to be present even when the camera is not on them. Family Guy, by the logic of its floating timeline and its increasingly self-aware metafictional construction, may not work this way. The theory of the show as a constructed thing as Brian's novel, or as a show within the show, or as the dream of an institutionalized Peter suggests that the characters may not exist between episodes at all. They assemble for the duration of each story and then dissolve back into whatever non-narrative state they occupy when no one is telling a story about them. In this reading, Bonnie's pregnancy lasted 7 seasons because that is how long the show ran while she was pregnant. Within the fictional space, no additional time passed. The pregnancy did not last 7 years for Bonnie because Bonnie only exists when the episode is running. Her experience of the pregnancy is the audience's experience of it discrete moments, spread across episodes, without the intervening continuity that would make the duration meaningful. This is a disorienting way to think about the show, but it may be the most honest way to account for its actual behavior. The characters of Family Guy do not seem to accumulate experience the way characters in realistic fiction do. Each episode is more like a snapshot than a chapter. The snapshots are loosely connected by shared premise and shared character, but they are not chapters of a single continuous story. They are episodes. And episodes, by their nature, have beginnings and endings. Between those beginnings and endings, the characters are both present and not present. They are potential energy rather than kinetic energy. They are waiting for the next story to be told about them. Bonnie was waiting for 7 seasons, and when the story finally got around to her, she gave birth, and she moved forward, and the 7 seasons of waiting were compressed into nothing, because waiting, in this kind of fiction, is not experience. It is simply the space between stories. On The Evil Monkey in Chris's Closet, a mystery that got an answer and lost its power. For several seasons, there was a running gag in Family Guy. Chris Griffin was terrified of a monkey that lived in his closet. Not a metaphorical monkey, not a dream image, but an actual, literal monkey who lived in the closet of Chris's bedroom and would periodically point at Chris in a menacing way when the closet door was opened. The gag was the structure, the sinister pointing, Chris's fear, the monkey's unexplained presence, and it worked because it was never explained. The monkey was simply there, and no one talked about it, and Chris was frightened, and that was the joke. Then, in season 8, the show explained the monkey. His name was revealed. He had a backstory. He had a reason for being in Chris's closet. The mystery of the evil monkey was resolved with an actual plot. Fans' response to this was largely that the resolution made the monkey less funny. Not because the explanation was bad, it was reasonably well constructed, but because the explanation removed the thing that made the gag work, which was its utter refusal to justify itself. The monkey was funny as a mystery. It was merely okay as a character with a known history. This is a lesson that Family Guy has demonstrated multiple times and occasionally learned from. Some of its best recurring elements work because they never explain themselves. The chicken fight works because the feud is established and then simply perpetuated without ongoing justification. Stewie's comprehensibility works because it is never pinned down. The timeline's inconsistency works because the show never tried to reconcile it into a coherent system. The evil monkey is the cautionary example, the one that teaches the lesson. Some questions are funnier as questions than any answer would be. The mystery is the humor. The answer is the ending of the humor. And so the script returns, at its end, to where it began, to the value of the unanswered question, to the specific pleasure of sitting with something that doesn't resolve and deciding that the sitting is enough. That the not knowing is, in its own way, more satisfying than any conclusion the show could provide. The mysteries of Family Guy are not puzzles. They are stories about the limits of what stories can tell you. They are invitations to keep watching, keep noticing, keep wondering. They are 20-plus seasons of a show that has been, among other things, a long meditation on how much you can leave unexplained before the audience stops caring. The answer, apparently, is quite a lot. Final reflections. The show that cannot stop asking questions. There is something genuinely remarkable about the fact that a show which has been on the air since 1999, which has been canceled and revived and canceled again and revived again and renewed for 4 more seasons as recently as 2025 is still generating questions that feel worth asking. The character designs have not changed significantly. The basic premise has not changed. The town is still the same town. The family is still the same family. And yet the questions keep accumulating because the show keeps adding to its own mythology, season after season, with the casual generosity of something that does not worry about running out. Each new episode is an opportunity for a new mystery to be born, a new inconsistency to be generated, a new thread to be left hanging for someone to eventually pull. The announcement of a Stewie spin-off series suggests that the Family Guy universe is not contracting. It is expanding. The stories are not coming to an end. They are branching. Stewie will have his own mysteries, in his own show, separate from and connected to everything that has come before. New questions will be generated, new inconsistencies will accumulate, new fans will watch and wonder and theorize. And somewhere in the ongoing production of all of that fiction, the original questions will remain. Who can hear Stewie? Who is Lois, really? What is Brian? What did Peter understand when the camera wasn't on him? Why does everyone hate Meg? What dies and what comes back? How big is the town? Where did Cleveland go and what did he bring back? Why does the coupon feud continue? What do the alternate universes reveal? When does this show take place? No one will answer these questions with finality. The show has had too many different hands on it for that kind of coherence to be possible, and it has run too long for a consistent single voice to have guided it through all of its seasons. But the questions are real. They are the shape that 25 years of storytelling leaves behind, and they are worth asking, slowly, in the dark, at whatever time you happen to be watching. Because the mysteries of Family Guy are, in the end, the mysteries of any long-running story. They are the places where consistency broke down, where intention met execution, and the gap between them created something unplanned, where writers made choices that contradicted earlier writers' choices and nobody stepped back to reconcile the two, where a show about a fictional family accidentally became a record of the real people who made it their priorities, their blind spots, their occasional moments of genuine artistic ambition alongside their occasional moments of lazy comfort. Family Guy is a mystery that has been investigating itself for more than a quarter century without arriving at conclusions. That is a long time to spend with an open question. But here you are, and here the show is, and the question is still open. Sleep well. The answers will still be absent in the morning, which means the fun of looking for them continues. Thank you for watching. Deeper Dive. Expanding the core mysteries with full analysis. The Stewie Comprehension Mystery, every instance cataloged, and what it means. Let us go back to the beginning of the comprehension mystery and spend more time there, because it rewards sustained attention in a way that a quick summary doesn't fully honor. In the very first episode of Family Guy Death Has a Shadow, which aired on the 31st of January 1999, following Super Bowl 33, Stewie Griffin is present. He speaks. He is given substantial dialogue, and the show has already, in that very first episode, left the question of his comprehensibility deliberately ambiguous. He speaks. The adults around him do not respond to most of what he says. Brian, who is also present in the pilot, does respond, and the audience is left to decide what is happening. The ambiguity was not accidental. MacFarlane has confirmed in interviews that it was a deliberate choice not to lock down the rules from the start, because locking them down would eliminate comedic options. If the rule were established, clearly everyone hears him, or nobody hears him, then every subsequent scene involving Stewie would have to honor that rule. Every scene would be shaped by it. Comedy depends on flexibility, on the ability to subvert expectation, and establishing a firm rule about Stewie's comprehensibility would reduce that flexibility. But the flexibility created a specific kind of complexity over time. As the show ran, the moments in which adults appeared to hear Stewie accumulated, and the moments in which they did not also accumulated, and the moments in which individual characters could hear him sometimes but not others accumulated, and the moments in which his comprehensibility seemed to be related to his emotional state, the theory established in Stewie's first word accumulated. And now, after 25 seasons, there is a complete and contradictory record of every character's relationship to Stewie's voice, and it refuses to resolve into a coherent system. Chris Griffin is an interesting case study. Chris is described in MacFarlane's Comic-Con answer as someone who can occasionally understand Stewie. This suggests an intermittent connection, perhaps more intuitive than analytical. Chris is not smart in the conventional sense, but he has a kind of emotional directness that sometimes bypasses the filters that prevent other characters from registering what Stewie is saying. In certain episodes, Chris responds to things Stewie says in ways that suggest full comprehension. In others, he seems entirely unaware of Stewie's presence or commentary. This intermittency is actually consistent with how children often relate to babies in real family dynamics. Older siblings sometimes develop an apparently intuitive understanding of what a younger sibling is communicating. They can decode the patterns of a pre-verbal child's behavior in ways that adults, distracted by their own concerns, cannot always manage. Chris, for all his cognitive limitations in other areas, might have a specific attunement to Stewie that operates below the level of conscious reasoning. He doesn't always process what Stewie says, but when he does, it lands. Francis and Thelma Griffin, Peter's parents, are confirmed to have had conversations with Stewie in which they clearly understood him. Both paternal grandparents, who are themselves characters defined by specific and sometimes difficult personalities, could hear the baby. Why? The show never says. But one possible reading is that the very elderly and the very young occupy a similar position in the social ecosystem, both slightly outside the mainstream current of adult activity, both paying attention to things that the productive middle of the age spectrum is too busy to notice. The grandparents hear Stewie because they are at a point in their lives where they have the time and the attention to actually listen. In the season 11 episode, Big Fat, which is notable for being one of the show's crossover moments where Hank Hill appears, Hank Hill, upon waking from a dream in which he was Peter Griffin, says, "I always wake up before I find out if they can understand the baby." This is the show making a meta joke at its own expense. using a character from another show to voice the exact question that the audience has been asking for years. The joke works precisely because it acknowledges the question without answering it. The show knows you're wondering, the show has always known, and the show finds that very funny. The theory of the Stewie-centric perspective that the show is being told from Stewie's point of view and therefore reflects the distortions of a baby's perception is worth expanding here because it is one of the most comprehensive explanations for the show's most persistent inconsistencies. Not just the comprehension mystery, but the character exaggerations, the show's tendency toward chaos, the way certain elements shift between episodes. In this reading, Peter is as buffoonish as he appears because that is how Stewie perceives him. Stewie is intellectually advanced far beyond his chronological age, but he is still a baby experiencing the world through a baby's limited context. He understands more than anyone realizes, but he also misunderstands in specific ways that would map onto how a very young child, however brilliant, experiences the adults around them. Peter, from Stewie's point of view, is someone who creates chaos and does not seem to understand its consequences. Peter, from an adult external perspective, might be more complicated, but Stewie renders him as the chaos engine, because that is the most prominent and most impactful feature of Peter from a small person's perspective. Lois, whom Stewie has always had the most complicated relationship with, is rendered in exaggerated and contradictory ways in this reading, because Stewie's feelings about Lois are the most complicated feelings in the show. She is his antagonist and his primary caregiver, and the person he depends on most, and the person he most wants to escape from. A baby who is both fiercely attached to and fiercely resistant to their mother would render that mother in exactly the way the show renders Lois patient and warm in some moments, complicit in the chaos in others, present in a way that is both nurturing and frustrating. If the show is Stewie's internal narrative, then his gradually shifting perspective across the seasons is also the show's perspective shift. As Stewie moves from the pure evil genius of Season 1 toward the more emotionally complex character of the later seasons, the show's rendering of its world becomes less rigidly comedic and more willing to accommodate genuine emotion. The violence toward Meg in the middle seasons might reflect a specific period in Stewie's development, the age at which children can be casually cruel without fully understanding consequence. The later season thaw the gradual humanization of even Peter's worst behaviors, the increasing complexity of Lois's character. The moments of genuine warmth might reflect Stewie's own emotional maturation. The comprehension mystery, in this reading, is solved not by any specific rule about sound transmission but by the nature of the narrator. Stewie hears what he is capable of hearing. He renders his family's responses to him in ways that reflect his own perceptions. Sometimes they hear him, sometimes they don't. It depends on what he is capable of believing in any given moment about his place in his family's world. None of this is confirmable. The show is not a careful modernist novel. It is an animated comedy that has been written by dozens of people over a quarter century and that adjusts its priorities from episode to episode based on what is funny. But the theory is beautiful, and it organizes a remarkable number of the show's apparent inconsistencies into something coherent. And in the absence of a canonical answer, a beautiful theory is the best available substitute. The Peter Griffin Intelligence Deep Dive, mapping his cognition across seasons. There is a specific episode in Season 4 called Petarded, in which Peter Griffin takes an IQ test, and the results place him in the range of intellectual disability. This is a canonical fact within the show's fiction. The state of Rhode Island, in the world of Family Guy, has official documentation establishing that Peter Griffin is legally classified as mentally handicapped. And then the show continues, and Peter Griffin navigates his life with a degree of functional competence that does not consistently match that classification. This contradiction is either the show's most persistent internal inconsistency or its most sustained joke about the inadequacy of standardized measures of human capacity. Possibly both simultaneously. Let's take both seriously for a moment. If the Petarded test result is taken at face value, then Peter Griffin's functional life, his employment, his friendships, his marriage, his various schemes and adventures represents an extraordinary achievement by someone operating with significant cognitive limitations. He has held multiple jobs across the series. He has raised 3 children who, for better or worse, are alive and ambulatory. He has maintained friendships that, however chaotic, have lasted decades. He has driven a car for years without usually killing anyone. He has navigated bureaucracies, made financial decisions, and engaged with legal and social institutions in ways that require a basic level of functional cognition. This profile does not match the Petarded diagnosis if we treat that diagnosis as a permanent, comprehensive description of his cognitive capacity. It might, however, match a profile of someone whose tested intelligence is low, but whose practical, adaptive intelligence is considerably higher. Intelligence testing measures specific cognitive functions and has well-documented limitations in capturing the full range of human cognitive capacity. A person can score low on a standardized intelligence assessment while still demonstrating substantial competence in practical domains, particularly in domains that they have practiced and that are part of their habitual life. Peter has been driving a car for years. He has been drinking beer at the same bar for years. He has been navigating the same social relationships for years. The specific, practiced routines of his life may represent areas of high adaptive competence, even within a profile of general, low-tested intelligence. He is not capable of solving abstract problems efficiently. He is very capable of doing the things he does every single day. This interpretation is generous, and it probably gives the show more credit than it deserves for consistency. But it does map onto something psychologically real, which is that intelligence is not a single thing, and that standardized tests are imperfect instruments. Peter Griffin's Petarded diagnosis might be telling us something true about one dimension of his cognition, while being an incomplete picture of who he actually is as a cognitive entity. The show also demonstrates, across multiple episodes, that Peter has areas of genuine expertise. His knowledge of pop culture from the 70s and 80s is encyclopedic. His knowledge of specific films is deep and detailed. He can quote dialogue, reconstruct plots, identify actors and directors. This kind of specialized memory and pattern recognition is a real cognitive capacity that coexists in the show's rendering of him with an inability to perform basic arithmetic or follow a straightforward set of instructions. This is not as contradictory as it sounds. Specialized knowledge is a different cognitive function from general reasoning. People who test poorly on general intelligence measures can have extraordinary domain-specific knowledge. Stewie's intelligence is presented as universal. He is capable in any domain he applies himself to. Peter's apparent intelligence is highly domain-specific. He is smart about the things he loves and effectively incapable in the areas he doesn't care about and has never practiced. What makes this a mystery rather than simply an inconsistency is the show's deliberate uncertainty about which version of Peter's intelligence is the real one. The Petarded episode suggests the tested score is the truth. The episodes where Peter makes accurate deductions, strategic decisions, or creative contributions suggest something else is going on. And the episodes where Peter's behavior is so reckless and so consequence-free that it defies explanation suggest the show is not really interested in maintaining either version with any consistency. The mystery is that Peter Griffin might actually be exactly as complex as any real person, smart in some ways, limited in others, capable of genuine insight, and capable of profound blindness, and not reducible to any single number or classification. The joke is that the show keeps pointing at the Petarded number and then immediately contradicting it. And both the mystery and the joke are, in their different ways, about the same thing: the inadequacy of any single measure to capture the full range of what a person is capable of. On the friendship between Brian and Stewie, what kind of love is this? The relationship between Brian Griffin and Stewie Griffin is the emotional center of Family Guy in the later seasons, the relationship the show has most consistently returned to as a source of both comedy and genuine feeling. It is also, in some ways, the most philosophically interesting relationship in the show, because it is a friendship between entities that should not be friends. Brian is a dog. Stewie is a baby. They are separated by species, by age, by apparent social function, by every reasonable measure of compatibility. And yet their friendship, built across the seasons through shared adventures, through moments of confession and vulnerability, through the specific kind of trust that develops when two people are honest with each other in the small hours, is the most sustained and most convincing emotional relationship the show has produced. The Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, which placed the two characters alone in a bank vault for an entire episode without cutaways or supporting characters, is the peak expression of what this friendship is. In that episode, Brian tells Stewie about the gun he keeps in a safety deposit box, about the reasons he keeps it, about the thoughts that make its presence feel necessary. And Stewie, who is 1 year old and has previously spent his time planning the downfall of civilization, listens. He responds with a kind of steady compassion that the show has never quite matched elsewhere. The mystery at the heart of their friendship is the question of what each of them is getting from it. Brian is getting something he cannot find anywhere else in his life, someone who takes him seriously. Stewie's intelligence is real, and his regard for Brian, when he extends it, is based on a genuine assessment of who Brian is. Brian does not have to perform for Stewie. He does not have to pretend his failed writing career is not failed. He does not have to maintain the pretense of intellectual superiority that he relies on in other relationships. Stewie sees him clearly and chooses his company anyway. Stewie is getting something equally rare, someone who can actually understand him, in the fullest sense. Not just the mechanical comprehension of his words, but a genuine engagement with his ideas, his plans, his fears, his gradual evolution from pure villain to something much more confused and human. Brian meets Stewie where he is rather than where a 1-year-old is expected to be. This dynamic has survived significant damage. Brian has, in the later seasons, done genuinely terrible things to Stewie, destroying Rupert, behaving with callousness in episodes that should have ended the friendship. And yet the friendship persists. Because the show needs it to, and because, within the logic of these two characters, the attachment they have to each other is more durable than either of them might prefer. The mystery is why this friendship works as well as it does in emotional terms, within a show that is otherwise so reluctant to make its characters feel things that stick. Brian and Stewie feel things that stick. Their connection is the show's most genuine thread, woven through the chaos of everything else. And in a show full of questions without answers, the question of what they mean to each other is one of the few that gets answered episode after episode, simply by showing you the two of them together and letting what's there be visible. On what happens when the show tries to be serious, the rare successful moments. Family Guy is not primarily a serious show. This is not a criticism. Its primary mode is comedy, and within that mode it has produced hundreds of hours of entertainment that has mattered to millions of people. But the show has, throughout its run, made occasional attempts to be genuinely serious, to sit with something real for a sustained moment, rather than deflecting it with a joke. When these attempts succeed, they are among the most surprising and affecting things in the show's catalog. When they fail, they become examples of the gap between what the show is capable of at its most ambitious and what it defaults to when the ambition runs out. The most successful, sustained moment of genuine seriousness in the show's history might be the Brian and Stewie Vault episode. We have returned to this episode multiple times in this script because it genuinely earns the attention. In that episode, the show committed fully to a dramatic mode without flinching from it, and without the jokes that would have let the audience and the characters off the hook. Brian's admission about the gun is as close to a moment of naked emotional honesty as the show has ever produced. The Season 6 two-parter, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, succeeds in a different way as a sustained, dramatic experiment that plays with genre conventions and takes its characters' extreme qualities seriously as story material. These episodes work because they honor the premise of who Stewie was in the early seasons, and give that premise its most complete dramatic expression. The death and funeral of Francis Griffin, Peter's stepfather, in Peter's Two Dads, handles grief with more care than the show usually brings to difficult emotional territory. The scene of Peter at Francis's bedside, the weight of a complicated relationship reaching its end, is played with enough genuine feeling that even the comedy beats around it feel like they are in service of the emotion rather than escaping from it. These moments scattered across the show's run, never quite systematic enough to be a trend, are evidence of what Family Guy could have been if different choices had been made at a different scale. They prove that the talent to make something emotionally resonant was always present. The choice to prioritize other things was exactly that, a choice. The mystery of these moments is why they are so infrequent. The answer is probably commercial. The audience that watches Family Guy has specific expectations, and sustained seriousness risks losing the attention of viewers who came for the cutaway gags and the absurdist comedy. But the mystery is also slightly more interesting than that. These serious moments exist within the same show that produces the Conway Twitty gags and the extended injury sounds and the gross-out humor. They are not in a different show. They are in this one. And their presence suggests that the show was always aware of what else it could be, even if it mostly chose not to be it. On the question of consequence, what sticks and what disappears? Any serious analysis of Family Guy's mysteries has to reckon with the show's fundamental relationship to consequence, specifically with the fact that most things that happen in any given episode do not carry forward into the next episode. The reset button is pressed. The status quo reasserts itself. Characters who learned something in episode 15 have not learned it by episode 16. This is the floating timeline's logical extension into character behavior. Just as ages don't accumulate and deaths don't reliably stick, the lessons characters learn in individual episodes don't reliably stick either. Peter does something terrible, recognizes it as terrible, makes a gesture toward repair, and in the next episode does something terrible again without any evident memory of the previous lesson. Lois reaches a moment of self-knowledge, acts on it, and returns to her baseline state. Stewie has a genuine emotional breakthrough with Brian, and then in the following episode behaves as though the breakthrough never happened. The show has been openly self-aware about this at various points. In the season 15 episode Inside Family Guy, when the metafictional structure of the show is brought to the surface, one of the things acknowledged is the show's reliance on the reset. Characters can do anything and be okay next week because the show requires them to be okay next week. But within this general absence of consequence, there are specific things that do accumulate. The friendship between Brian and Stewie has grown and deepened across seasons, with individual episodes contributing to a long-running character relationship that is more than the sum of any single episode. Peter's progression toward cruelty, however uneven and inconsistent, represents a real change from Season 1 to Season 10 that cannot be fully explained by individual episode choices. The ensemble has shifted and changed and evolved in ways that are visible in aggregate, even when they cannot be pinned to specific moments. The mystery of consequence in Family Guy is the mystery of what the show is actually tracking beneath the surface of its episode-by-episode reset. Because something is tracking, something is accumulating. The characters are not exactly the same in Season 20 as they were in Season 1, even though no single episode committed to changing them. The changes happened in the margins, in the aggregate of small choices made across a very long time. The consequence is not in any individual episode. The consequence is in the shape of the show, seen whole. And perhaps that is the final thought worth sitting with. As the night gets deeper and the mysteries accumulate, Family Guy is a show that resists consequence at the episode level and cannot avoid consequence at the series level. The things it refuses to commit to aging, consistent character development, stable geography, coherent timeline, eventually become the shape of what it is. The absence of commitment is itself a commitment to a certain kind of story. A story that runs forever. A story where nobody grows old. A story where the town is always there and the bar is always open and the baby is still 1 year old and always will be. That is what the floating timeline actually means. It is not a failure to take time seriously. It is a decision to be the kind of story where time does not apply, where the family is always together, always chaotic, always on the edge of something, where the mysteries never close because the story never ends. It has been going since 1999. As of 2025, it has been renewed through 2029. 30 years of a family in a fictional Rhode Island town, asking questions they will never answer, solving problems they will encounter again next week, loving each other in the specific broken way that this family loves. There is something true in that, underneath all the comedy and all the inconsistency. The stubbornness of the show's existence, its refusal to end, its insistence on continuing long past any reasonable endpoint, is the closest thing it has to a mission statement. It keeps going because family keeps going. Because the mess of people who share a house and a name and a history keeps going, regardless of whether the individual episodes resolve cleanly. Because the questions of who hears you, and who you really are, and what you love, and why you stay, those questions don't resolve. They persist. They are the texture of a life in progress. Family Guy has been in progress since the 31st of January 1999. It is in progress right now, somewhere in a production building in Los Angeles, as someone writes the next episode, and someone else voices a character, and someone else draws the lines that will eventually move across your screen. The mystery continues. So does the show. Thank you truly for spending this time with it. With me. With all of these questions that have no endings. Now please get some sleep.